This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Brian, and I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
So prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide if the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because this film is lit. There's nothing like looking if you want to find something. You certainly usually find something if you look, but it is not always quite the something you were after. It's The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, and this film is lit. Hello and welcome back to This Film is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. It is the first episode of our summer 2024, or 2024 summer series, I should say. Talking about The Hobbit. Obviously, it's one book split into three films, which we'll talk about as we get into the episode. We have lots of notes. If you've ever joined us for our summer episodes, you know those things they tend to get long, because for this, we both read the books and then watch the movies and discuss. So we have a lot more notes usually. Also, they're usually like more involved books and movies. Usually, and there's like a lot of going on in them usually. But we do not have a Guess Who segment since we both read the books. And we don't, this year, we do not have a predicting the series segment, which we often do in the summer series, if it's something we've not read or watched before. So we like 50 Shades, and I did that for Twilight because I had not read and watched those before. And then
I did that for The Hunger Games.
And then we both did it for Insurgent, Divergent, whatever, that series. So yes, we normally do that. If you have a suggestion for a segment we could add for the next two episodes of this, let us know. But we don't have anything for this episode. We got plenty of other stuff to get to. Before we get into that, I wanted to drop a quick disclaimer here at the top. just because, just a disclaimer about lore and the Tolkien verse. We are not Tolkien purists, or at least I'm not. I don't know if you can describe yourself that way.
Neither a purist nor an expert of any kind.
I know some people are, and that's fine. I just wanted to drop a warning here right at the beginning that if you're here to listen to two people who are like Lord of the Rings, Tolkien, like super, like lore heads or whatever, or you're here to like listen to us rip into this series and all the lore mistakes and problems and this and that and the other, just a warning that that's not really like the direction it'll probably go. We have lots of criticisms, at least so far, of the first film and some of the stuff and whatnot, but it's not going to be a ton of like super nitty gritty like, well, you see they did this and that doesn't make any sense because time like, canonically, like there's not going to be a lot of that. There will be some stuff here and there we'll discuss, but that is not
and there may even be some things that we're confused on because we don't know the lore.
That's the other thing. I'm sure we will get some things wrong. And then also on top of that, it might even annoy you because there might be things that they changed that I like. Because I am not only are we not Tolkien purists, I personally do not care at all about like respecting the sanctity of the text necessarily. I used to be a lot more that way. I have grown, honestly, a lot through doing this podcast.
Yeah.
I have kind of grown to come to a place where I'm much more interested in how the adaptation works as a story in itself and like as a movie and that sort of thing and how it just works as its own thing. I'm not really concerned about like little nitpicks about lore and stuff
I
like
think
that.
That's true for both of us.
Yes, yeah, I agree.
Especially as
I was just speaking for myself.
As we have done this series, which we're coming up on what, like 7 years of doing this.
Yeah.
We have our little intro about reading the book before you watch the movie and blah, 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 but it's really more of a bit at this point than anything.
Yeah. So I just wanted to throw that out there again because, sometimes these summer series, we get a bunch of new people who've never listened to our show, don't really know what you're getting into because we do cover more popular kind of big name titles during these summer series. So, yeah, that's just a little advance warning. I say warning. It's it's just a little thing that just to set expectations of what how we're going to talk about The Hobbit and the films and that sort of thing. So All that being said, let's get right into it. If you have not read or watched, specifically watched, because this will be a summary of the film, but if you have not watched or read The Hobbit recently, we're going to give you a brief summary of the film in Let Me Sum Up.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
All right, this summary is sourced from Wikipedia, so take it with a grain of internet. Approaching his 111th birthday, the Hobbit Bilbo Baggins begins writing the story of his adventure 60 years earlier for his nephew Frodo. Long before Bilbo's involvement, the dwarf king Thror brought an era.
That one got me reading the book. I was like, Thror, not Thor, Thror.
The dwarf king Thror brought an era of prosperity for his kin under the Lonely Mountain until the arrival of the dragon Smaug. Smaug destroyed the nearby town of Dale, drove the dwarves out of their mountain, and took their hoard of gold. Thror's grandson, Thorin, sees King... Oh,
so many THRs.
I know. It's Thranduil, isn't it? Yeah. King Thranduil and his wood elves on a nearby hillside and is dismayed when they leave rather than aid his people, resulting in Thorin's everlasting hatred of elves. In the Shire, 50-year-old Bilbo is tricked by the wizard Gandalf the Grey into hosting a dinner for Thorin and his company of dwarves. Balin, Dwalin, Fili, Keely, Dori, Nori, Ori, Owen, Gloin, Bifer, Bofer, and Bomber. Good lord.
I believe it's Biffer, but who cares?
Biffer, Bifer. I don't know.
Biffer, Bofer, and Bomber, I think. At least in the movie, I think that's how they say it.
Gandalf's aim is to recruit Bilbo as the company's burglar, quote unquote, to aid them in their quest to enter the Lonely Mountain. Bilbo is unwilling to accept at first, but has a change of heart after the company leaves without him the next day, racing to join them. Traveling onward, the company is captured by 3 trolls. Bilbo stalls the trolls from eating them until dawn, and Gandalf exposes the trolls to sunlight, turning them to stone. The company locates the trolls' cave and finds treasure and elven blades. Thorin and Gandalf each take an elf-made blade, Orcrist and Glamdring, respectively, and Gandalf gives an elven dagger to Bilbo. The wizard Radagast the Brown finds Gandalf and the company and recounts an encounter at Dol Guldur with the Necromancer, a sorcerer who has been corrupting Greenwood with dark magic. Chased by orcs, Gandalf leads the company through a hidden passage to Rivendell. There, Lord Elrond discloses a hidden indication of a secret door on the company's map of the Lonely Mountain, which will only be visible on Durin's Day. Gandalf later approaches the White Council, consisting of Elrond, Galadriel, and Saruman the White, and presents a Morgul blade, a weapon of the Witch King of Angmar, which Radagast obtained from Dol Guldur as a sign that the Necromancer is linked to an eventual return of Sauron. While Saruman presses concern for the more present matter of the dwarves' quest, requesting that Gandalf put an end to it, Gandalf secretly reveals to Galadriel that he had anticipated this and had the dwarves move forward without him. The company journeys into the Misty Mountains, where they find themselves amid a colossal battle between stone giants. They take refuge in a cave and are captured by goblins, who take them to their leader, the Great Goblin. Bilbo becomes separated from the dwarves and falls into a crevice where he encounters Gollum, who unknowingly drops a golden ring. Pocketing the ring, Bilbo finds himself confronted by Gollum. They play a riddle game, wagering that Bilbo will be shown the way out if he wins, or eaten by Gollum if he loses. Bilbo wins via trickery, and Gollum notices his ring is lost and that Bilbo has it. Chased by the furious Gollum, Bilbo discovers that the ring grants him invisibility, but when he has a chance to kill Gollum, Bilbo spares his life out of pity and escapes. Meanwhile, the Great Goblin reveals to the dwarves that Azog, an orc war chief who killed Thror and lost his forearm to Thorin in battle outside the dwarven kingdom of Moria, has placed a bounty on Thorin's head. Gandalf arrives and leads the dwarves in an escape, killing the Great Goblin. Bilbo exits the mountain and rejoins the company, keeping his newly obtained ring secret. The company is ambushed by Azog and his hunting party and takes refuge in trees. Thorin charges at Azog, who overpowers and severely injures him with his warg. Bilbo saves Thorin from the orcs and challenges Azog just as the company is rescued by eagles summoned by Gandalf. They escape to the safety of the Carrack, where Gandalf revives Thorin, who renounces his previous disdain for Bilbo. They see the lonely mountain in the distance, where the sleeping Smaug is awoken by a thrush knocking a snail against a stone.
Yep.
End movie 1.
There you go. That is a summary of The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey. I think that was mostly correct. There's one thing I would say that is a very much the part where it says like previewing the return of Sauron or whatever. It says linked. The necromancer is linked to a sign that the necromancer is linked to an eventual return of Sauron. That's not in this like revealed.
Yeah,
in this movie.
I don't think that's a thing we know yet.
Yeah, that we know it as viewers of the of the previous trilogy, but as it within this film, that is not really what we have no idea what that's for. But other than that, I think it was pretty much accurate. So, all right, the way we're gonna do this, we have it broken up into our normal segments: better in the book, better in the movie. The movie nailed it. We're gonna go through all of those segments, starting first with what we thought was better in the book.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
So we're kind of skipping pretty far ahead.
The way this works,
into the movie here.
Just a reminder, if it's been a while since you listened to a summer series, or if you're new here, the way this will work, we're going to jump around in the timeline of the film, because the better in the book segment is all the stuff we thought didn't work in the movie or worked better in the book or whatever. And so it's, we may like this first one starts here kind of far into I say far, it's, like 15, 20 minutes into the film or whatever. Because some of the other stuff we'll talk about in other segments. We'll jump around. When we get to better in the movie, we will then jump back and go to the beginning of the movie again, kind of. It's the best way we found to do it. There is no perfect solution, but this is what we've landed on. So, we're going to jump around. In each of these segments, we kind of restart the movie, kind of. Kind of. Yeah.
All right. So, as I said, we're jumping a little bit into the movie, because the first thing that I want to talk about for better in the book is the part where all of the dwarves are arriving at Bilbo's house, because I think that it's pretty close.
Yeah. I actually had this in the movie, nailed it personally.
But I found it to be a lot less whimsical and engaging than reading the book.
I mean, that's fair. I don't necessarily disagree. I thought it was pretty close. In particular, the part where they all like fall through the door is like a very specific moment that is mentioned in the book. One thing I did miss that I had in better in the book here that I agree with is that I actually really liked in the book, at least the idea of it, that they all had color-coded hoods. In particular, because they were like color-coded based on like relation. So like the ones that were like brothers or like cousins or whatever had the same color hoods.
Yeah, like a family color.
Yeah, and I just it would help kind of telling them apart. And now we'll get into what they did with the dwarves here in our literal next point in terms of like the design of the dwarves and stuff. But I did like the color-coded hoods in the book. I thought that might have been a helpful detail, potentially. Anyways, but yeah, overall, I thought they mostly nailed it, but not quite as whimsical is a recurring.
That will be a thing that you hear me say and allude to quite a bit.
Yes,
throughout this episode. Okay, so up next, Richard Armitage.
Yes, plays Thorin,
and he's very good. He does a good job with the acting. I don't know anything about him as a person.
No, I have no idea.
I literally know nothing about him.
I actually don't even know of anything else I've seen him in
other than these movies. I really don't know.
I'm sure I have. I just thought,
So he does a good job, and he's very handsome, but he does not look like the rest of the dwarves at all.
I mean, I agree, and this actually gets into one of my biggest problems with the movie, because it is so front and center. It's like one of the main most noticeable things is the look of the dwarves.
Yeah.
I have really mixed feelings about the looks of the dwarves, because to me, the issue is, and it kind of, this encapsulates some of the broader issues with the movie as a whole, but they kind of, they're such a wild range. The designs of the dwarves range so wildly from like complete comical makeup jobs, like I think Bomber, the fat one.
Yeah, the really big guy with like the big looped braided beard.
Yeah, well, I don't know if he has a looped braided beard, but there's another guy who has the looped braided beard around his face and stuff like that. And then the redheaded, I don't know, but he has a crazy beard, but he's like it's a very like comical, like fat suit and like makeup. And then, they vary like from that level all the way to, like you said, like Thorin and like Keely, I think, or Feely, one of those two, even both of them kind of, but the one who's
the younger one, which I think is Keely.
I think it is. The one who ends up being a love interest in a future movie, that one, just look like guys.
Yeah, they kind of just look like dudes.
And that range, I think, is indicative of kind of an issue with the whole movie where they couldn't decide like what visual style to go with, and so they kind of just did everything. And I think it makes for and again, we'll get into this more later with other stuff, but it just creates this like sort of dissonance in like how seriously am I supposed to take this movie? Like, what is the tone this movie is going for? And we talked about this in the prequel. Obviously, a lot of this stems from the fact that there was very little pre-production time once Peter Jackson took over the movies. Basically had like none, essentially. And so I think some of that probably has to do with like the visions of Del Toro and the stuff he worked on before Jackson took over, and then Jackson taking over and his version of it and that sort of thing. And so it just ends up with this thing where you have this cast of characters where, some of them look like they belong in a cartoon, and some of them look like just guys.
Handsome leading men.
And it's just like, it's not that it entirely doesn't work, but it doesn't work enough to me that, and again, is indicative of other issues with the film of just not picking a lane, I think. And which gets even more complicated when we get to stuff related, because comparing it to Lord of the Rings, which we'll do a lot, the Lord of the Rings movies, obviously we've covered those already on the podcast. And, both of us have a huge affinity for those movies. I think we only see like one dwarf, which is Gimli.
Yeah.
In those movies, right? Like, I think. And Gimli is kind of in the middle of this range. He looks kind of like, he reminds me more of like Balin looks in this one, the old guy with the white beard, where he's like, he looks like a dwarf, like what you imagine a dwarf, because obviously Gimli has the huge beard and he has like prosthetics and stuff, but he doesn't have these overly comical like braids.
Yeah, no, there's nothing comical about his character design in Lord of the Rings, but he does still look like a dwarf.
He still looks like what you imagine a dwarf to look like. Yeah. And then, and so some of the dwarves in this look kind of like Gimli does, but it gets to this point where, and I think I can understand the argument of probably what they're going for, because it tends to be the ones that look more like people, like just guys, tend to be the younger dwarves. I think slightly like Feely and Keely, and Thorin I think is relatively younger than some of them. I don't think he's like in the middle age range, I think, if I had to guess. And so I think the idea is like maybe some of the younger dwarves are still like, there's just maybe like different, like
they haven't grown into their dwarfness yet.
Yeah, or that within dwarf culture, like there's different styles for different generations and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I think that totally tracks and makes sense. That all being said, it still ends up, you get something that feels just sort of, again, just like a scatter shot of artistic direction.
Well, and I think you're right that you can sit here and you can come up with explanations for that range of different character designs, but there's really nothing within the text of the movie indicating a reason for the different character designs. So it just feels
kind of strange. Yeah. You're like, okay, so this guy, again, Bomber looks like a cartoon character.
Yes.
And Thorin looks like Aragorn. And I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. Like, it's just so kind of strange. And along similar lines, another thing that I think actually works better in the book, which is a note that I had just randomly written down while we were watching it that didn't really go anywhere, but this makes as much sense as anywhere, is in the movie... in the book, you're kind of allowed to forget about the other dwarves when they're not specifically being referenced in the text because you're not seeing them. Like you're only, whoever's being referenced in a given sentence about like what they're doing or what they're saying, you think about that dwarf, but the rest of the time you don't really at least the way I was reading, I'm not like constantly like keeping 13 different characters in my, or 12, I guess, for the dwarves, different characters in my head. And so you're kind of allowed to forget them a little bit. And so it doesn't really bother me as much that I can't really remember their names or anything about them. Whereas in the film, it's kind of frustrating, at least to me, to constantly see these 12 characters on screen and most of them I know nothing about. I can't remember their names, like other than a couple of them. And like, so, like Balin is like an important guy. He talks to Thorin a lot because he's like the old wise one. Or Thorin obviously is important. And eventually Keely becomes more important. And you see some of the other ones do stuff, but like you don't really know them or like remember what their names are or like anything about them other than what they look like. And I'm sure that's part of why they gave them such distinct looks, obviously, is like, okay, and kind of similar to my thing with the color-coded hoods. They're like, well, we don't want to do that. Let's do these very unique, make each one look very distinct to make them memorable as characters. But there's so many of them that even still, they just get lost in this muddle. And so every time you're watching all of these characters do things, you're just like, I don't know who any of these people are.
Yeah.
And to me, that wasn't an issue in the book. Because again, you just it just like kind of leaves, you don't really think about it. But when you're seeing them constantly in the movie, I found it kind of frustrating because I'm like, I don't know who any of these people are other than like 3 of them.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's a similar issue. And again, I don't know how to get around that because obviously you got to include them all or else people are going to lose their minds.
You cannot go about this adaptation cutting dwarves.
Yeah, you can't be like, oh, well, we're going to use like 4 of them. Like people are not going to, this is not going to go over.
Nobody's going to go for that.
Yeah, exactly. But so it's not an easy problem to solve. And I understand what they tried to do. I just, it's one of those where it's just like,
I just almost think it would have been a better decision to let some of them fade into the background.
Yeah.
And to make the character designs like a little more
generic,
like a little more similar and like not have everybody try to be this standout character.
Yeah. Because they don't get enough time to really like even recognize them, like the guy with the silver beard who has like the loops around it. Like I think that might be Ori, maybe. I can't remember, but it might be Dory, but it's just you want to remember who they all are because they are so unique looking, but then you're like, I can't. They don't get any time to do anything. I don't know. It's a tough problem, and it's not. I don't think there's a good way to solve it necessarily. But yeah, I don't think what they did works particularly well. So.
So moving on from that, so we move forward with our story, and while we're still at this dinner party at Bilbo's house, there's a line in the book that I don't think made it into this movie. I did not catch it.
No.
But I believe Thorin says this about Bilbo, I think. And he says, like he toasts to Bilbo Baggins or something like that. And he says, may the hair on his toes never fall off. And that is the kind of flavor within a fantasy world that I love. Like weird little sayings. And it makes sense when you know things about hobbits and you know that they have like really hairy feet and that's important.
Yeah.
Another thing that I wish that the movie would have kept was Bilbo borrowing one of the dwarves' hood and cloak.
Yeah.
When he catches up with the party. So getting to the first thing that we disagree on, I think. So this movie, I guess, expands out on a character because
I would even say just adds because
well, is it Azog or Azog? Is it?
I don't know.
Azog,
I think.
He's mentioned in the book.
Yes.
Like he's mentioned,
dead.
He's dead.
Yeah.
He's mentioned as like the orc that killed his Thror, like Thorin's grandfather. But the book or the movie resurrects him, and makes him kind of a central villain in the story. And I just question whether or not the story needs that type of character.
I understand that, and I know that's a lot of criticism that a lot of people have. I like bringing Azog in and making him a central villain, I think only in the first 2 movies from my memory. I could be wrong about that. He may still be there in the 3rd one. I don't remember. I've seen all these. I just don't remember anything about the 2nd and 3rd one. I like taking this character that has this interesting backstory with Thorin of having killed his grandfather, and Thrain goes missing, who is Thorin's dad, and it like loses his mind. And I think he makes for kind of an interesting antagonist that, again, is based, that has this kind of backing from the book and already has a pre-built history with Thorin.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he's necessary in the book at all. I will say this, that like, this isn't like better in the movie for me in the sense that like I wish this character was in the book. I think the book being the length that it is and the structure that it is does not need this character at all. My argument, though, is that the movies do. That the movies do kind of need, or at least this first movie does kind of need a primary antagonist for Thorin in particular, for him to kind of square off against. And I like taking one that is like an unfinished business kind of, well, you know, like relatively unfinished business backstory from the film, because I don't even, or from the book, I'm not sure. Somebody else kills him. I think Dane is some other dwarf kills him in the book. So Thorin doesn't really get any resolution for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I like expanding that and giving him that resolution. I would say my biggest complaint with Azog in the film is that I wish he was an actual like makeup character, more like Lurtz, as opposed to like the CG kind of abomination that he ends up being. He doesn't look terrible all the time. He doesn't
look that bad, but he looks so uninteresting. And especially compared to like other orcs, like especially in Lord of the Rings trilogy, and even the other orcs in this movie, he just looks like so like smooth and clean.
Yeah. Now
and, like uninteresting.
To be fair, well, I don't think he looks uninteresting. I actually like the design. I just wish, and so we talked about in the prequel that he was built. Or that he was replacing an actual makeup, that Azog originally was a different orc that we see in the movie.
Yeah.
One of the generals who like gets killed at one point. But they didn't like him because they didn't think he was imposing enough, and so they created the new version of Azog to fill that role. And I don't actually hate his design. I think he's kind of cool looking. I just wish they had had the time to actually make him like a full makeup character, because he reminds me a little bit. And I think this is what they were pulling on, at least somewhat. He reminds me slightly of the orc that is like the main like general in the Pelennor Fields battle. Mm-hmm. The guy who like when they throw a rock at him and he steps out of the way and spits on the rock and he's like, you remember that guy?
Yeah.
He's like kind of pale and smooth, but he also he has, you know, he looks like an orc still, but he's a lot more pale and like light skinned than some of the other orcs in the movie. And so he kind of reminds me of some of the like design inspiration pulled from that character. But that character is an actual like full body makeup character. And so he has a lot more presence. Whereas this guy, again, every single scene, it's just CG. And in the very, very end scene, I think it mostly works. Like the big fight at the end, I think he looks the best in that scene at night, like in all the fire and stuff. But I think it's a fine addition that is only necessary for the film. And I say necessary. I think you could make this movie without him. I don't think he's necessary.
Yeah.
I think it's a fine addition for the film.
And I don't even like disagree with your point that maybe we need in this movie specifically some kind of central villain. But and this is a problem that I had the whole time I was trying to write notes for this episode, is like trying to separate out this movie from the larger trilogy.
I didn't have that issue because I guess partially because I couldn't remember anything about.
I was really having that issue, and
that was not an issue.
I don't remember a ton of specifics about the other two movies, but I don't know. I was just really struggling with trying to focus specifically on this film, which is part of the reason that I think, have so much of a problem with the inclusion of this character, because I feel like there are so many moving parts throughout this series.
There definitely is going forward. I would agree with that. And again, for me, I would have to, I may revisit it and say, I think he's a complete it's a complete mess next movie. Like we may get into the next movie and I go like, I wish this character wasn't here. That may very well be the case. Because I didn't have the issue of separating them for whatever reason. I was able to very much kind of sequester this film as just its own thing. And for this film, I think it's totally fine. And maybe it would have been better if he had killed him at the end of this one or something. I don't know. Again, once we get to the future ones, we'll revisit that obviously and see how I feel about Azog then. But for this one, I did not have an issue. I had this other note here that I just wanted to bring up because part of the backstory in this film that we get with Azog is we see where Thorin Oakenshield got like his name.
Yeah.
And that he during that fight with Azog, he ends up picking up like a log. His shield gets broken or something, and he picks up like a log and uses it as a shield, like an oak log, which is where his name comes from. I looked this up. It's not mentioned in this book, or at least not yet, where we are in the book. And it also did not happen in a fight with Azog. Like it happened at a different time when Thorin was younger. But I think it makes sense to move that little anecdote of that into that backstory there. I will say I do not like, because I didn't even realize this was the case until I was doing some research. When Thorin at the very end of this movie. And this is definitely better in the book because this is a dumb movie decision. And actually, I found out this is a Richard Armitage decision, which we'll get to, I say we'll get to. We're talking about right now. But at the end of this movie, when he squares off with Azog again, and he comes walking down the tree, he has a branch shield. Yeah, and I had assumed that was just
like a branch
from the tree they were sitting in.
Yeah,
turns out no, that's the same branch.
He just carries it around.
He carries that around as a shield because if you look on some of the art for it, he's actually like bolted, like there's like metal like attachments on it, like and stuff. Like he has done some extra like reinforcement to it or whatever. But it's it's a terrible shield. You wouldn't do that. He used it it's interesting in the moment as like a spur of the moment, like grabbing a thing and yes, that becoming like a legend for your name or whatever. But carrying it around after that, I find particularly silly. Like if you want to have it, if he took it home and put it on his mantle or something, sure. But like actually using it, I think is very dumb. And in particular, because it would be a nightmare to carry around. There's just so many problems. But anyways, I found out that apparently that was Richard Armitage's idea. He's like, oh, I should use that shield still. And they were like, sure, whatever. So
now, okay. I will say, though, objectively, is it stupid? Yes. Do I believe that Thorin would do that?
That's fair.
Yes.
That is fair. I will give you that. That character-wise, it
might be a good character choice.
Especially for the Thorin of the film.
Yeah.
Who is, kind of a hot-headed idiot who holds on to grudges and stuff and that kind of thing. So okay, that's fair. You may have convinced me there that for the character of Thorin in the film, him dragging that log around to use as a shield actually not the worst decision, like narrative decision, despite the fact that it's a horrible practical decision. But
the scene where they encounter the three trolls in the woods, there was actually a lot of stuff that I liked about that scene overall in the movie. One thing that I really did not enjoy, though, was when they were fighting with them, like before they capture the dwarves, and I felt like it was just like a cacophony of movement. Like I could not follow what was happening on screen.
That's an issue this movie has a lot.
Yes.
And I think the series going forward will, from my memory, especially compared to the Lord of the Rings movies. And I think a lot of that probably has to do with the fact of the lack of pre-production time for planning all this kind of stuff out. I mean, some of these fight scenes are very clearly choreographed pretty specifically, but there's also a lot of stuff where you wonder, because it is kind of just chaos. Yeah. And because there are so many characters.
Yes.
It just ends up being like just people kind of like doing shit everywhere on screen, and it's hard to like keep track of what's happening sometimes. So I agree with that. Like, and again, that was a kind of an issue I had throughout the film. I will say one thing I do like better in the movie here, though, that's related to the battle scene with the trolls, is I actually really like having the dwarves all come in and attack and try to save Bilbo and fail. Because in the book, they just kind of walk in one at a time and get captured. Like one of them walks in to investigate, and then they don't hear anything from him. And then another one walks in, and then they don't. And it's just like, I'm not sure that would, like, how you would show that in a way that worked at all in the movie. So I think having them all rush in to try to save Bilbo makes sense. I also like that it culminates with them giving up because the dwarves all grab Bilbo and they're like gonna threatening to kill him, and they're like, all right, fine, we give up. I think that's a perfectly good way to like kind of shortcut how they get captured by the trolls.
Come back around to where we need to be.
To where we need to be without like having this weird comical like super long, they all just stumble in one at a time and get captured kind of thing.
That is a thing that the book does multiple times, is like having them show up like one by one or two by two.
Yeah. A moment though in the troll scene that I do have in better in the book is that I love that William, who's one of the trolls, they all just have like normal names.
I loved that they all had normal names. I was like,
William,
this is
George,
great.
and something. I can't remember what the other one is. But I love that. I think it's William, like, seemingly does not want to kill Bilbo. The other ones are like, we should kill him and eat him. And he's like, heck no. He's like defending Bilbo, kind of, which I thought was really interesting. And the movie doesn't really do that. This is a really big problem I have with the film. This one particular line and moment I thought was a huge mistake. Maybe the biggest mistake, like single mistake this movie makes, in my opinion. I think this is right before... I think it's after they get the sword. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is. They find the swords in the cave, and Gandalf gives Bilbo the dagger.
Yeah.
Sting, what will eventually become Sting. And when he gives him that, Bilbo's like, I don't know, I'm not a fighter.
He's like, I've never used
a sword. He's like, I'm not brave or whatever. And Gandalf says to him, true courage is knowing not when to take a life, but when to spare one.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate that because getting to Lord of the Rings, the whole thing, and in this movie and in this book, Bilbo's sparing Gollum is the event
the whole point.
It's the whole point of everything. The moment where he chose not to kill Gollum is literally the thing that ultimately culminates in the downfall of Sauron, because Gollum can show up at the end and then bite off Frodo's finger and fall into the lava and destroy the ring. So that's the whole point, is that Bilbo not killing Gollum is, and his mercy in that moment. And I hate the decision that apparently Gandalf needed to like give him that nugget of wisdom.
Yeah.
To me, the point is that Bilbo is that kind of person already.
Yeah.
Because of, not just because he's like magically that kind of person, but I think a big point of, especially with the, and this is as close to being a Tolkien purist like that I guess I'll be, is that kind of the point is that the hobbits live like perfect lives. Their serene pastoral lives are kind of like the idyllic lives that Tolkien thinks we should all kind of try to live. And I think the point is that living that kind of life, growing up in that kind of communal, agrarian, pastoral society creates people that are kind and empathetic and good people. I think is like kind of the whole point of The Lord of the Rings as a series. And so Bilbo doesn't need a high and mighty wizard to come in and be like, hey, by the way, courage is knowing when not to kill somebody. Courage isn't killing somebody. Courage is knowing when to not kill somebody.
Yeah.
I hate that. Like, to me, that is such a complete misunderstanding of the entire point of the entire series that it's mind-blowing to me that it would be included, because it feels like they understand, Jackson and the writer.
It seems like they understand the point
so deeply, all of the nuances of this, of both the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings books. To include that to me is just wild. I don't know. Maybe I'm making more of it.
No, I agree with you. I don't like it either. For the same reasons that you just listed. I also want to tack on that I feel like maybe a studio note.
See, that's the thing.
Like some studio exec was like, we need to explain this to the dumbass theater goers.
Or something like, we need to seed this for some reason so that when he doesn't kill Gollum, like we have like a thing that
that like precluded
that. And like, I think you could make the argument that, because I keep saying that, like, I don't think Bilbo needed that lesson. I think you could argue that even in the movie, it's not necessarily that he would have killed him had Gandalf not said that.
Yeah.
And so it's possible that that line is honestly there more for the audience than it is for actually Bilbo. But either way, it's still unnecessary because I don't think the audience needs that line. I think that's underestimating your audience a little bit, at least to some extent. Because we talk about all the time how people have terrible media literacy and they don't understand what stuff's about and blah, blah, blah. But in this particular instance, I think like people know, because the Lord of the Rings goes out of its way, the Lord of the Rings series in the movies goes out of its way numerous times. Gandalf like outright explicitly states how Bilbo not killing Gollum was like very important, and he has some role yet to play in this story, and blah 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 blah, and it wasn't pity that stayed his hand, or all that sort of stuff. So like I think there's enough with those other movies that we didn't need this line at all. And again, if it's meant for Bilbo, I think it's a gross misunderstanding of Bilbo as a character and of the series as a whole. If it's for the audience, then I think it's just cheap and unnecessary.
I agree. And I also think that Martin Freeman and also Andy Serkis have the acting chops to communicate what is happening in that moment with Bilbo and Gollum in a way that, like, even if you aren't familiar with Lord of the Rings, that you can still understand what's going on. I was desperately
worried in that moment that we were going to hear at the moment where he almost kills Gollum later, like in the movie, or he's thinking about it. Because I didn't remember. I was horrified as that scene was playing out in the film that we were going to get like an echoey voiceover of Gandalf saying, "True courage is knowing not when to take a life." And I was like, oh my God, please, I will turn this off. And they don't do that, luckily. Like we don't get like a flashback to it, because that would have been the worst. But I actually have a note about that scene later we'll get to. But anyways, that is maybe, like I said, the single biggest issue I had with the entire film, because to me it just feels like a complete misunderstanding of everything. But there's a little detail that I really enjoyed in the book that does not make an appearance in the movie, is that when they get to Rivendell and they're like getting down into the valley to get to Rivendell, although I think in the books the Rivendell is the valley and not actually the like whatever, doesn't matter.
Yeah,
because I keep calling it the last homely house or whatever, and I don't know if it's actually, I don't know if the actual like settlement is called Rivendell. It seems to be in the Lord of the Rings movies and stuff.
Yeah.
In the book, I got the vibe that the valley is Rivendell, and that the like home, Elrond's home isn't actually called Rivendell, but I could be wrong about that. It probably is.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's a little thing that anyways. But as they're arriving at Rivendell, the elves are like singing from the trees and like insulting them. And I would have loved the idea of them like walking in, and because they're like singing about Thorin's beard and him like not dipping it in the water.
Well, and it would be especially funny because the elves in these movies are like so serious.
They're so serious.
They're so dignified and so refined.
Yeah. And they're like making fun of Bilbo for eating too much and stuff. And then I loved Gandalf has to be like, chill out, you freaks. Like he's like gotta like chastise the elves and tell them to chill because they're like being jerks or whatever. I just thought that was very funny in the book.
A little moment in Rivendell in the movie that I did not care for. So they're at dinner and they serve like salad, like vegetables, and the dwarves are like they don't know how to eat it, or like they don't know what it is. And I just think that like elves eat girly salads is a pretty cheap and very uninteresting and very 2012 coded joke.
Yes, absolutely.
Has not aged well.
No. In a series, and especially from a director who in the Lord of the Rings movies, for the most part, at least from my memory, it's been a couple years since we watched them, does not, it portrays very positive masculinity. Like the books and the movies both are, chock full of portrayals of positive masculinity and that sort of thing, and generally don't stoop to like weird like stereotypes about gender or anything. You know what I mean? Like it just doesn't. And so it is kind of a weird out of place joke for sure.
Another little line from the book that I wish the movies would have included, when Elrond is looking at the elven blades that they found at Orcrist, and it's Orcrist Glamdring, it's Orcrist the goblin cleaver.
Yeah.
And he like looks at it and he says, "May it soon cleave goblins once again."
Yeah.
And I would have loved to hear Hugo Weaving
say
sit.
that. Made soon. Yeah, I can't do a Hugo Weaving, but he's.
No.
I love.
I think he could have done it
absolutely.
with aplomb.
Oh, absolutely.
But so they leave Rivendell and they go up into the mountains and they get captured by the goblins. And now correct me if I'm wrong here, but when I was reading the book, when Bilbo gets separated from the dwarves and he like falls into the crevice, I interpreted that as him like sliding down a hill or something.
Yeah, I interpreted it as kind of like in the movie when they first fall through the floor and they're like falling down like like those like slides, because like in the movie they're like they have like a trap that like corrals them into a little like pen or whatever, and they're like sliding down like a rock chute or whatever. I kind of imagine
like it says in the book he like fell into a crevice, and I imagine him like sliding down like a hillside within this cave system.
Yeah, exactly.
And in the movie he like falls off a bridge and like down a cliffside. And I listen, I know it's a movie.
Well, and I will say this to the movie's credit, the book does make an explicit point that hobbits shake off bumps and bruises they're way more resilient than like other races because of their like small, like weird little men or whatever.
Sure. But I do very firmly believe that this particular fall would have just straight up killed him.
Very possible. I was actually taking a note when that happened because I saw him because he's like fighting a goblin and then he falls, and I saw him fighting the goblin and I was writing a note and then I looked up and he was down in the bottom. So I actually didn't see the fall.
Far.
So yeah.
But that's okay. So they're with the goblins, and they take the dwarves to see the Great Goblin.
Yeah.
Whose name I love.
Yeah.
The Great Goblin. I love that. But this movie character, we talked about Azog being a CGI monstrosity,
not
but
it
pales in comparison to the Great Goblin. Just truly a CGI monster of epic proportions.
Yeah.
Also, we had a conversation, you and I, before we watched this movie about the difference between goblins and orcs in the Tolkien universe and whether or not there's a difference. And we taught how there's a foreword in the book explaining that they're actually the same thing and they're just called different things at different times. And that is all well and good. But I will very firmly maintain that these guys seem very different from all of the other orcs that we've ever seen in this universe.
So, let's talk about that. First thing, the CGI monstrosity of the Great Goblin.
Yes.
I completely agree, because another issue that so much of this movie has for me, and it's an issue I had with it at the time, is it has that sheen of artifice that something like Chronicles of Narnia had a little bit at times, where like Lord of the Rings, the trilogy of movies, is chock full of CGI. There's tons of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do wonder if part of the issue is that there's actually not that much CGI in the first Lord of the Rings movie. Like the first, from my memory at least, not that there's none, but like the first movie is actually fairly grounded in the sense that like all of the Nazgul for the most part are all just like dudes in cloaks on horses. And I'm trying to think of anything in that movie. Obviously, there's the stuff with the Balrog is a big and like the hordes of goblins and stuff, and the cave troll. Like there is CGI. One, maybe it's just time frames and like how long they had to work on it to polish it and get it looking good, because that's obviously a huge part of what goes into like why CGI often looks bad. Isn't because like the people working on it were bad at their job, because this is Weta Studios. It's I think the same people that did all the CGI for the Lord of the Rings movies with 10-year better technology or whatever, so it shouldn't be worse, you know what I mean? But with all the production issues this series had, and the sort of sped up production cycle and everything that ended up happening with the director changes and everything, I wouldn't be surprised, and I'm sure I know this information's out there, that they just had a significantly smaller amount of time to work on all the CGI in this, so it ends up not looking as good as it did in the Lord of the Rings movies. And there are some mediocre looking effects, especially in like Return of the King and stuff, in those movies. But this one, pretty much all of the CGI, like not all of it, a lot of the CGI it just looks too clean.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel like it's in the
not
universe in the
selling
same
me
way.
on the reality of the world.
And so I wonder if part of that is like in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, they kind of build it up more slowly. Like there is CGI in the first movie, but it's not as heavy as it is in this one, where entire action sequences are nothing but CGI. And again, the first movie has a little bit of that. The Balrog sequence is almost entirely CGI, kind of. But like we don't really go ham with it until Return of the King, where like we're on these huge battlefields with all the font. Like that's all obviously CGI. But I wonder if the buildup of it helped in that series. But also I think they just had more time and stuff.
Yeah.
But even beyond that, I think a big part of it, and this kind of goes back to the character design of the dwarves and stuff, is that I think a lot of the art direction and stuff in this movie, while very good, the sets and stuff, a lot of them, some of them feel better than others, and it's that kind of mixed bag where like some of it feels very real and lived in and great. Anytime they're in Bag End, feels exactly like the original trilogy because it's the exact same sets. Whereas some of the other stuff, and there are times throughout the movie where there's like the sets and stuff they're on feel good, but other times the sets and stuff feel kind of barren and kind of clean. And kind of, it's a thing I talked about very specifically in Chronicles of Narnia of an issue I had with the series. It doesn't feel as lived in as like the Lord of the Rings series does. Like everything, every single millimeter of that movie at least the first couple movies. Again, there's some issues in some of the Return of the King stuff, but is so like meticulously detailed and like weathered and aged, and it all feels so real. Whereas in this movie, so much of it feels so fake.
Yeah.
In a way that just doesn't really work
and,
all the
and
time.
I think, and this is going to be a thing that comes up again for me over and over throughout the series, I think, is that how do I put this? I think it was to these movies' detriments that they are kind of naturally going to be compared to Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And in this case in particular, for all of the reasons that you mentioned, but also Lord of the Rings, issues with Return of the King notwithstanding.
Which I love Return of the King. I'm just saying, I think overall it's a little bit less like meticulous. I don't know. The CGI is a little heavier handed in that one in a way that feels more like this movie.
Overall, Lord of the Rings is just a really good example of artfully combining practical effects with CG and like kind of doing that in a way that is really meticulous and results in something that builds out a complete and very real feeling world. And if you're going to hold pretty much anything else up to that, it's going to come out feeling like garbage.
Yeah, and it obviously almost assuredly comes down to the fact that a lot of that in order to blend practical effects with CG as well as the Lord of the Rings films does, takes an insane amount of planning and pre-production work, because you have to make all these sets, you have to craft all these models and makeups, you have to figure out where there's so much planning that goes into that level of filmmaking where you're blending huge practical sets and huge practical creatures with CG and all that sort of stuff that takes so much pre-production work. And we didn't go into all the details, but the fact that this movie had so little, this series had such a truncated pre-production time, and the fact that it was 10 years later and technology had advanced so much, they probably just got to the point where they're like, we don't have time to do this stuff, to do the work we need to blend the practical with the... I'm sure Peter Jackson would have loved to spend a bunch of time. I guarantee he would have loved to make a practical version of the Goblin King or of the Great Goblin that is to where because most of the time we see him, he's just sitting in a chair. Like, it's not like that couldn't be a practical makeup. It could.
Right.
There are other times where he does some stuff, but you could have some of this be practical, some of it be CG, and you could blend it in a way. And I'm sure Peter Jackson would have loved to do that. But when you have 2 months of pre-production time, you just don't. He spent years and years and years in pre-production on the Lord of the Rings movies. And so I like that. And my other point was that because technology had gotten so much better, we're 10 years later, they knew they kind of could rely on CGI to kind of cover through some of the issues and like, well, you know, we don't have time to plan this all out, so we'll just kind of do it in post.
Yeah,
like
limp to the finish line.
Yeah, and so like that's another big part of it is that had the technology been worse, you have to be more creative and you have to use more practical effects and figure out and, you know, supplement it with CGI. Whereas this one, anytime they got to a scene where they're like, well, this is going to take a lot of time and work, they could go, we'll just do it CGI. Like we'll just have this all be CGI, you know, and again, that maybe short selling this movie's a little bit, but I do think that's probably a big issue of what was going on. So to your second point, your second question here about that these guys seem very different than orcs and they're called goblins in this movie. I think that the movie universe and Peter Jackson's universe, there actually is a difference. I think goblins are their own thing. I think orcs are their own thing. I think maybe even hobgoblins are their own thing. Obviously, Uruk-hai become a different thing later in the Lord of the Rings movies. But I think goblins are, which is also how when I first read this series, I interpreted it. So it's not outlandish to me to like interpret the series that way of the goblins being slightly different than orcs and having them be kind of their own like species of thing or whatever. And so, yeah, I actually think that Peter Jackson just kind of made the creative decision. These are goblins. They're different than orcs. They look different. They kind of have their own thing going on. Whereas in the preface to this, like you said, or in the forward to this, it says that there is no human word for orc or English word for orc or whatever. So anytime you see goblin or hobgoblin, that just means orc. And so essentially in this book, it's saying like orcs, goblins, they're all the same thing. Very clearly not the same thing in the movie. Yeah. Or they're just, or if they are orcs, they're a completely different.
And I wouldn't even have a problem with them being like different branches of the same orc family tree. But
that could be the case. But I think they are, and because they use the word goblin and they call him the Great Goblin, I think it is the case that they, in the Peter Jackson universe of Lord of the Rings, he decided these are different things, which I am fine with. I actually don't mind that change at all. I think that makes sense. I think it's totally fine. It also fits more in line with like modern perceptions of, because fantasy has evolved since 1939 when Tolkien wrote the series. And so the idea of, you know, in modern fantasy, goblins and orcs do tend to be different creatures or whatever, slightly different creatures in most fantasy properties. So again, I think it's a totally reasonable change to be like, yeah, they're just a different thing. There are goblins, there are orcs. They're not the exact same thing.
Yeah, that's fair. The scene with Gollum and Bilbo, kind of like the classic scene from this property.
Yeah.
I had read this book before. It had been a while since I'd read it. Maybe like probably going on 15 years now since the last time I had read this book. And I found the part of the book where they're doing their riddle battle, but specifically the moments where Gollum is like remembering back to his previous life as a non-creature to be so profoundly sad.
Yeah. I will say, I will get to it. I have it better in the movie note. I think the movie captures a little bit of that with one little change they made.
A little bit.
And we'll get to that in better in the movie in a minute. But yeah, no, I would agree. One thing in this scene that I wasn't a huge fan of in the movie, because it also retcons something from the Peter Jackson movies, actually, if you remember, but is how Bilbo finds the ring.
Yes.
Is that in this movie, they change it so that we see Gollum, because Bilbo is fighting another goblin. They fall, and the goblin's like laying there injured, and Gollum shows up. And I actually kind of like that, him like coming up and like dragging the goblin away is like creepy and weird. And we know he like kills goblins. He mentions it in the book. So I didn't mind that, but while he's doing that, the ring like flies out of he has like, I guess like a pocket on his loincloth or whatever. It like flies out of the pouch on his loincloth and like bounces. And I think Bilbo sees it. Maybe he doesn't because he then just stumbles upon it later. But we see we see the ring fly out. And then Bilbo, as he's like walking like after Gollum, is holding up Sting, which is glowing. And he like glances down and sees the ring and goes, what's that? And picks it up. And in the book, he just like is like scrounging around in the dark.
Yeah.
And his hand literally just like kind of closes around it. And he's like, oh, and he like realizes and he just sticks it in his pocket and doesn't really think about it. It doesn't really matter. It's not that big of a change, but I will say this. In the Lord of the Rings movies, we see this moment in like a flashback.
Mm-hmm.
And it is the scene that plays out in those movies is what the Hobbit book describes, which is Bilbo just like crawling through the dark on the floor and like coming up with the ring in his hand and being like, oh, okay. Again, it's not a big deal, but I didn't think it was a necessary change. It was just there so that we can see how the ring got there. So people didn't go, oh, he just like finds the ring. Like, what is, I don't know. I just didn't think it was a necessary moment at all.
I 100% agree. So then we come up on another scene that for me was just a cacophony of motion.
Yes.
And things happening, even worse than the troll scene.
Oh, absolutely.
By like a lot. One moment in this that I specifically really did not like was the giant rolling boulder.
And what you're talking about here is the escape from the goblin.
Yeah.
Yeah. As they're running out of the goblin town or whatever. Yeah. No, I agree. I think the Goblin Town escape has some fun moments in it. There are some little set pieces that I like. The little moment where they get on that one bridge that's swinging. Yeah. And like it swings over and they can't quite get off. And like a few of them get off, but then it swings back and some goblins jump on the bridge with them and they're like fighting them and then it swings back and then they cut it. Like there's some little set piece moments that I think are really fun and remind me of some of the better moments from like the Lord of the Rings movies. And like there's the part with the ladder where they like put the ladder onto the guys' heads and then push them off the ledge and then the ladder creates a bridge and they run over the ladder and then the last guy like hits it with his hammer and there's some little stuff like that. But those are like the moments within the larger scene that are like cool because you can tell what's happening. And then the scene as a whole, though, like you said, is just this loud, obnoxious mess.
Yeah,
that is like impossible to tell what's happening. 500
things are happening at once.
Yeah,
and then like at the end, and they're all on the big like wooden platform thing, and it falls forever. Forever.
Yeah. It's just, I agree. Like I said, there are some small moments within that scene that I think work well and are fun, but just as a whole, it is not great. It's just too chaotic. The scene where Bilbo decides not to kill Gollum.
Yeah.
I think overall works fine in the movie. I think it's just a little too long. I think they linger. I think the edit just needed to be tightened up a little bit. And they linger on it so long. That was actually the reason I thought we were going to get the echoey voiceover of Gandalf being like, oh, courage is not choosing when not to kill people. Because I think it just sits there a little, like we cut back and forth between Gollum's sad face and Frodo, like, or Bilbo, like contemplating whether or not he's going to kill him like one or two times too many. I think it could have, like, if that scene is 30 seconds long, it could have been like 20 seconds long and it would have been fine. It's not a big deal. It just needed to be edited a bit tighter, in my opinion.
Another kind of issue that I had with this movie was how little a sense of like time passing there was, especially because the book actually goes to pretty great lengths to let you know how much time has passed.
Yeah.
Like we get multiple times, like Bilbo will note the passing of the seasons, or like they'll say specifically how long they stayed in a specific place.
Yeah.
And in the movie, I'm like, I don't know. Like they've been traveling for a while, I guess, but for how long? Has it been weeks? Has it been months? I don't know.
Yeah, you can, and you don't really know, and it is. I don't think it's a huge detriment.
It's not as detrimental as some of the other things we've already discussed. But it is kind of, it's just one of those things where as a viewer, as a person who is consuming a story, it kind of holds you off kilter a little bit to not know, to like not understand what the passage of time is.
Because that's a big part in understanding the scope of the journey. Like how far are they going? Where, like how long is this taking them? Yeah, it's part of like kind of establishing the arduous nature of their journey. If they've been on the road for weeks or, and then they stayed at Rivendell for a month or whatever. Like it's helpful to know that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And my very last note here, I really love the song that the orcs sing in the book when they're all trapped in the tree.
Yes.
I really love the funny little birds song. And I demand that these orcs sing a little song. I want it.
Yeah.
I want Azog to sing me a little song.
I will say I did like that the goblins sang the goblin song in Goblin Town.
Yeah.
That was another fun moment, which might be in the movie Nailed It. I can't remember. But they do sing the little goblin song. Anyways, I think that is in the movie Nailed It. We'll get there in a second. But yeah, the orcs don't get to sing a song. Azog should have busted out a microphone.
I wanted them to sing. And I will admit, too, that a big part of my kind of issues with this movie is that my Hobbit movie is the 1977 animated Hobbit movie. Like, as I was reading this book, that's what I'm picturing in my head.
Which I've never actually seen.
I'm not picturing Martin Freeman and company. I'm picturing the little Rankin Bass creepy animations.
It's fair. That is fair. All right, that was all the stuff we had for better in the book. It's time to go ahead and talk about what we thought was better in the movie.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
There's a line in the very opening, the first page of this book that cracked me up, where they're describing it's
a very like in-depth description.
Very in-depth description of Bag End specifically, but of a hobbit hole. And it says at one point, with floors tiled and carpeted. And I was very glad in the films they decided against carpeting the hobbit holes. Now that could mean like rugs, I guess.
Yeah.
But it does say carpeted, which to me implies like carpet, like a modern home with carpet flooring.
I mean, I would bet that means rugs.
I agree.
Because of like the historical kind of nature of it, and they don't have vacuum cleaners.
I
but
agree. Okay, my point was just the word carpeted made me imagine a Bag End from the film, but with horrifying like modern carpet.
Yeah.
And that was disgusting to me. And so that made me laugh. And that I was, again, almost tongue-in-cheek including this because I agree that it meant like rugs, which they have rugs in Bag End all over the place. But when I saw carpeted, I was thinking,
and we are both carpet haters.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. That was why I was laughing at that line. I think it's a good decision, and maybe this is even a change from what I said in Lord of the Rings, but I think it makes sense for Gandalf to not have a blue hat.
Yeah.
Because in the book, he is described as having a blue hat and a silver scarf, and the silver scarf, whatever. But the blue hat, he's Gandalf the Grey.
He's very fashion forward.
Just make him gray. It's fine. Like, I think it works.
Yeah. I mean, he has to look like he does in.
Yeah. Well, obviously,
Fellowship.
yes. He has to look how he does in Fellowship. But even then, they made that change in Fellowship because I think he's described the same in Fellowship. And I just think it makes sense to make it all gray instead of like a blue hat. But I mean, it is kind of a blue gray. I get blue's not that far from gray,
I guess it's kind of a blue gray-ish,
sure,
but
yeah.
I think they should have given him like a spangly silver scarf.
Like
I think,
extra silver
that would have
scarf.
been good. I would have liked that. When this movie initially opened, I had forgotten how it started, and I kind of was initially expecting to hate it.
Yeah.
But I did not mind opening with Bilbo like writing the book, and then we get like the backstory with the dwarves and then Smaug. And I think it makes sense, and I think it's also in line with kind of the established storytelling style of Lord of the Rings. And then like the bit with like Thorin and Thranduil. I don't think the beef between dwarves and elves needed additional explanation, but I didn't mind it.
Yeah, it's fine. No, I agree. I really love doing that because we get to start with Concerning Hobbits, which will never not get. It's maybe my favorite song in the Lord, which I like the entire score, but it's maybe my favorite song in the Lord of the Rings score. But yeah, I also like seeing the backstory and setting up the Arkenstone, which the Arkenstone does come up eventually.
Yeah,
as mentioned later in the book, but I think setting it up here because we do get this backstory relatively early in the book. It's once they all show up, Thorin tells this backstory. I think it's Thorin. One of the dwarves tells the backstory, so we get it fairly early in the book, but it's not like first thing like it is here, which I think works. But the Arkenstone is not mentioned in the book yet. And I like also setting up, because at least, again, whether or not I like where it'll go eventually, but I do remember that Thorin kind of gets the gold crazy whatever thing,
yeah.
which I don't remember if that's in the book or not.
Yeah,
but
he gets the treasure crazy.
And so they set that up here by establishing that Thror ended up kind of being corrupted by all the gold and kind of lost his mind, kind of giving us some foreshadowing for that. You know, and that the greed is what kind of prompted Smaug to show up, because they were hoarding all this gold, and kind of setting up thematically stuff that we're gonna get to eventually, and is gonna be the through line about, you know, greed and hoarding
and not hoarding wealth.
Yeah, exactly, and that sort of thing. So I liked all that. I think Thranduil, introducing him probably makes sense here early on, because he's not mentioned at all, like anything with the elves. I think it kind of makes sense to at least a little bit set that up. And that being said, I think it's kind of silly in the movie how they like all show up and stand and watch and then just leave. Whatever.
It is kind of a dick move.
It's just like a weird, like, okay, yeah. Very funny, but like, why did you all come here just to watch and then leave? Whatever, sure, fine. It's fine. Because like, and realistically, it's more like in the Lord of the Rings, you know, they talk about like, who is it? Boromir is, or not Boromir. Somebody is like, where was
Gondor when the Westfold fell?
Where was Gondor when the Westfold? Or Theoden is like, where was Gondor when the Westfold fell? You know, it's that kind of moment,
right?
But like without. It's like, except if we had set that up by
Gondor, showing the armies
like Boromir,
of Gondor,
like standing on a cliff, like watching as the Westfold fell and being like flipping him the bird and like rolling away. It's kind of silly, but like whatever, it's fine. Also, in the prologue, it works because you don't necessarily interpret that as maybe
it's not
like
literal.
Yeah, it is more of like the story about what happened, and so we're seeing more, you know, emotionally what went down as opposed to like literally what happened. I think it's fine. It all feels very Lord of the Rings prologue-y. I will say it looks a bit in the movie. It's all very CG heavy and just
like you know, it, like I said, it feels in line with that kind of narrative style of starting out with a prologue. Is it as good as the prologue in Lord of the Rings? Nothing is.
No, not even close. Primarily because they don't have Cate Blanchett narrating it. This one. I think Balin might be. I'm not sure who it is, but it's some guy. I like, and like you said, I actually don't even mind working Frodo in. I was worried I might not like that, but having Bilbo be writing the Red Book of Westmarch, which is what the book he's writing is called. We also get a fun Sackville Baggins reference that I don't know if there might be like one in the Lord of the Rings movies. But I like having a more explicit one here because they kind of play a major role, relatively speaking, in the Lord of the Rings books. The only thing here that kind of stuck out to me that wasn't like amazing was that the noticeable de-aging on Ian Holm. Yeah, it just, you know, it's
old Bilbo.
Yes.
For anybody who doesn't immediately recognize
Ian Holm
name.
plays Bilbo in the Lord of the Rings movies, and he plays himself again in this one.
The de-aging was pretty noticeable throughout, I thought. And I'm willing to give it like a little bit of a pass on the elves. Yeah. Because they are supposed to look kind of weird and otherworldly. Yeah,
it's not as big of a deal.
But like everybody else. Yeah. Although, to be fair, we have not seen Orlando Bloom yet. And I feel like I do remember his de-aging being pretty bad looking.
It seems like you wouldn't have even needed to. Orlando Bloom still look fine in 22. Like, I feel like he doesn't look that much older.
Maybe I'm misremembering, but I feel like I have a memory of like seeing him in one of the later movies and being like, woof.
That's very funny to me because it's one of those things where elves are already ageless. So like, even if he, I don't know, like, I don't think you would need to make him. He would need to look close enough to how he looked in Lord of the Rings. Yeah, like he doesn't need to look younger than he looks in Lord of the Rings because elves' lifespans are infinite, essentially, anyways, or whatever. Right. Like super long. So like the time frame between the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings in like the universe, Legolas aged 60 years.
Yeah,
or whatever,
it's like nothing to him.
Which is like nothing. So like as long as he doesn't look considerably older than he did in the Lord of the Rings movies. I think it would have been fine. I don't know.
I could be wrong. I feel like I remember them doing like a de-aging thing on him.
That's interesting.
Which I agree with you. They probably didn't need to. Like they probably could have just given him like a rejuvenating facial,
a little extra makeup,
like a blonde wig, and he would have been fine.
Yeah. Well, also he probably just shouldn't have been in the movie. But whatever.
We'll
get to that. Yeah,
we'll get to that eventually.
But
this opening scene with Bilbo and Frodo, I also didn't necessarily mind incorporating Frodo, but I did think that this scene dragged
A little bit.
I thought it was like it was a little too long and it was a little too winky.
I would agree with that. There's a little bit too much of the like, and now I'm going to go sit under a tree, and like literally at the end of this is like, I'm gonna go surprise Gandalf as he gets here. I'm gonna go sit under the tree remember where you saw me at the beginning of the first Lord of the Rings movie? That's where I'm going right now. It's a little too wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
No, I think if that scene with the two of them had been like half the length it was, and not as wink, wink, nudge, nudge,
referencey to
I think it would have been fine.
Yeah. Like I said, I liked it initially. It was just towards the end. I was like, okay, we get it. We get that we're right before the the Fellowship of the Ring.
I understand.
We get it. Yeah.
Another thing that I felt like we did not need because like I understand was then when we pop back and we're with young Bilbo, we get the 60 years earlier like little text on the screen. Sure, but I don't feel like we needed it.
I don't think we needed it, but I think it's relatively helpful. Specifically, obviously we know it's earlier, but like a very specific, like how much earlier this is, I think is fine. Like, I think it helps kind of place the story, like when it is for us as an audience. Again, obviously we know it's earlier. It's just, and I don't know how necessary knowing it's exactly 60 years earlier is, but it's, I don't know. Your point stands. I don't think it's necessary.
I guess it just felt so like immediately coming off of the previous scene. It felt a little redundant to me.
Yeah, that's fair. I did like the little callback in Bag End where Gandalf bangs his head into the chandelier in the foyer because he does that same thing in the Lord of the Rings. Those are the kind of little fun nods where it's like not like a big like.
That's the kind of nod to Lord of the Rings that I enjoy.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. I did like there's a thing mentioned once all the dwarves show up and they're discussing stuff. It's mentioned that Thorin tried to recruit other dwarves to come help, and like nobody else was interested in helping.
I
don't think that's mentioned in the book.
Think that was, and we spoilers. We have not quite finished the book, so I guess it could be
mentioned later. Yeah, but it's not mentioned here in the beginning, which I think makes sense.
But I did think that was really interesting and a good addition because we know that there are other dwarf kingdoms.
Yeah. He tried to recruit them, and they're all like, "Nah, that's your problem. We're not interested in helping with it."
Another little moment in this opening scene in Bag End that I really liked was when some of the dwarves are like, "Well, you're a wizard. You've killed dragons. You've killed dragons. How many dragons have you killed?" And Gandalf's just like, I thought that was fun.
Yeah.
I did not understand why they all started yelling at each other right after that. I felt like I missed something.
I think the idea is just that like they were under the impression that like, oh, we got a pro dragon slayer, we'll be fine. And then when they realize, oh, this guy, they're like, well, what the fuck are we doing? Like, oh, they just kind of start arguing, I think is the idea. But I also liked along those lines, I really liked this line where I think Balin or somebody says, we number 13. But not 13 of the best or brightest, kind of solidifying the idea that this isn't like an elite band of like warriors.
Yeah.
And they say there's another line later about this, about like how only some of them are kind of like accomplished warriors, but they're kind of just like a ragtag group of dwarves that agreed to do this.
They're just some dudes.
Yeah, like some of them are good. Like obviously Thorin's a very good warrior. Balin has a history. He's old, but he's, he was a warrior back in the day. And some of the other ones, but like other guys are just like,
well, and
along for the ride.
like they can all handle themselves. They can all fight to some extent, but
they're not all seasoned warriors. Like, they're not all Gimli or whatever. I also like this line that's set up, which I don't remember this from, again, at least not the early part of the book. Thorin mentions that Smaug hasn't been seen for 60 years. And he's like, points out basically that like, look, other people, if we are seeing the signs that now's a good time to return to the mountain, we probably aren't the only people seeing that. Like we may have to like fight people, or like, other people may be returning or may go try to claim Erebor. So like we got to get there quick and that sort of thing. Pointing out that other people could make a play for Erebor, which kind of sets up obviously the Battle of the Five Armies later, which I liked. I liked that little kind of tease that, there could be conflict in the future over this, and that it's not just like, the only issue isn't them getting there. There could be other people trying to get there, which I don't remember anything like that in the book. I really like this line between Gandalf and Bilbo, where as Bilbo's trying to decide if he wants to come or not, and he says to Gandalf, "Can you promise that I will come back?" And Gandalf says, "No, and if you do, you will not be the same." Don't think that line's in the book anywhere. We tried to find it and could not, so I thought that was a good line. I also really like the discussion between Balin and Thorin that they have like in the entryway by themselves, where Balin's like, "You don't have to do this. Like, why are we doing this?" He's like, "Look, you obviously, you know, we got forced out of Erebor, but you've created like a good life for us in the Blue Mountains. Like, we have everything we need. Things are fine. We don't have to go do this." But Thorin's like, "No, it's my duty. I have to do this. It's my fate. Whatever." Kind of again, just I think it's a good character moment of like who Thorin is.
Yeah, really setting him up as the duty and honor guy.
Yeah, and like who feels duty bound by his bloodline and all that sort of stuff to fulfill this terrible purpose, you know, that to cite our Dune episode. And so I really like that, especially for the kind of subtle tweaking they do to Thorin's character in my opinion, giving him more character in the movie. And so, yeah, I liked that a lot. And I also liked the idea that just getting a little bit of backstory of like, oh, they do have their own life. You know, they're like, what have they been up to? Oh, well, they went and they created this life in the Blue Mountains and sort of thing. I will say that kind of runs contrary to, now that I think about it, to Bilbo's line later about them not having a home, but whatever. It's a little bit, who cares? I still like it. It's fine.
The Misty Mountains song is from the book.
Yes.
But I did include it here because I think the movie's version of it objectively slaps.
Every version of a song is going to be better in the movie, in my opinion, because we all know my feelings on reading songs. I fucking hate it. And yes, it's a great song. I also had this in better in the movie. The lyrics, like you said, straight from the book, but it's actually fun hearing it. And because I actually like that they used music in this one. There's almost none in the Lord of the Rings series. I think there's like a couple deleted scenes where like Aragorn sings or something. Maybe I don't know if any of in the theatrical cuts. I don't know if there's any like songs in the Lord. There might be. Oh well, they're probably the Green Dragon song, but even that might be a cut scene. I don't know. There may not be any music in the Lord of the Rings movies. Again, it's been since we did it on this podcast that we watched it. I think so. Anyways, point being, I liked seeing some music in the movies because it is such a big part of all of the Lord of the Rings books. Plus, like you said, great song. Absolutely great. And I also liked that they just make it this kind of deep, dark, moody, like vocal arrangement.
Very moody.
Because in the book, it's specifically mentioned when they play this song that they all pull out like instruments and there's like clarinets and drums and fiddles and a harp. Thorin plays a harp. And I'm like, that would be...
I would have loved to see... super serious Richard Armitage Thorin playing a little harp. I would have enjoyed that.
It's just, again, I don't think I think they could have made it work, especially for some of the other songs, but in particular that song I think works really well as
I like that it's a vocal arrangement and it does give it's very like folklorish feeling because of that.
And they knew they had a banger because they used it. The trailer is just that song. Yeah. Like the first trailer was just like them singing that song. They knew like this is the good stuff.
Real quick, one thing that I noticed as I was reading this song in the book, a random lyric, on silver necklaces they strung the flowering stars. And I noticed that, and I was like, that sounds like the Even Star necklace. And I know that was like a movie invention. That's not in the books.
It's at least not in the main text of the books. I thought we discussed that it may have been like an appendice.
Well, she gives him like a brooch.
Oh, okay.
In the books.
I can't remember. So yeah.
I looked this up. I went and fact checked myself. Okay. But like the necklace and everything, that is like a movie invention. But I read that lyric and I was like, I don't know, maybe Peter Jackson like got the idea for that, like the look of it, or somebody, from
very well could have been. It wouldn't surprise me because they very clearly scoured all this.
Yeah,
stuff.
Silver necklace, flowering stars. Like to me, that sounds exactly like the Even Star.
One thing that you could pretty much can't say about the Hobbit movies and the Lord of the Rings movies is they very rarely just invent stuff like out of whole cloth.
Yes,
there's usually something that they're referencing from somewhere in the books, even if it's like a tweak on the reference or whatever.
I really liked that in the movie, Bilbo makes up his own mind to like catch up with the dwarves and join them. Where because I felt like in the book Gandalf kind of pushes them out the door.
Oh, absolutely.
After he wakes up.
No, I had the exact same note. I really liked specifically first when Bilbo wakes up, which is similar in the book, where he wakes up and the house is empty and everybody's gone, and he kind of has this moment of like relief, but also you can tell he's like kind of disappointed. And I thought the movie captured that perfectly. But then going a step beyond that, I really love that instead of Gandalf showing up and being like, "You're late, you gotta go," and Bilbo just kind of being like, "Okay, I guess," like he just kind of lets Gandalf like shove him out the door, like you said. I like having him kind of make the decision. No, I want to go on this adventure. Like I want to do it, and then like the shot of him running after them with the contract flailing in the wind behind him is fun. I also really like this, and I double checked. I didn't remember this in the book, of them having taken bets on whether or not Bilbo would show up, and in specific that Gandalf bet, because he's like, "Well, how did you bet?" And then somebody throws Gandalf a big bag of money, and he's like, so Gandalf believed in him. I like that. I thought that was a fun little moment.
A line that I really enjoyed that the movie added was
it's really good.
It's good.
Yes.
When Bilbo he asks Gandalf if there are any other wizards, and we discussed this a little bit in the prequel episode because he said the two blues,
and he can't say them because they don't own the rights to the names, but he can say the blue wizards.
So he says like, "Oh, I can't remember their names." But he also mentions Radagast the Brown, and Bilbo says, "Is he a great wizard or is he more like you?"
Yes, we both burst out laughing. That is a great line. Absolutely fantastic. And also very in line with the humor of the book, I feel like. Like that's very much the kind of, because there are some jokes throughout this movie that are not. And one in particular that I didn't mention that I could have put in better in the book because I did not think it worked is when Gandalf kills the Great Goblin. That felt completely flat for me and felt just really dumb in the movie, where he's the goblin's like, what are you going to do to stop me, or something like that, and Gandalf like slices him with the sword and he goes, "That'll work," and like falls over dead, or "That'll do it," and like falls over dead. I don't know, that felt like Marvel humor, like kind of, and it just didn't. Whereas this, something about it, I don't know, it just feels more in line with the kind of humor we get in the book.
Speaking of Radagast, I also like Radagast. I a little weirdo. I liked him. I like his rabbit sledge.
Yeah. No, I also liked adding Radagast, particularly because he is in the Lord of the Rings books, but does not make an appearance in those movies. So I like incorporating him here, and I thought they did it pretty well. I'm not sure I particularly care for like the CGI animal doctor stuff. Felt a little. It's one of those things where I think would have worked better had it all been like puppets and stuff, or like practical effects. I think would just like the CGI little hedgehogs. I don't know. Some of that stuff that I didn't love. Again, some of the execution, which is my note for all of this, is I think this movie is full of great ideas with mediocre execution.
Yes.
Like for the most part. But I did really enjoy seeing a wizard other than Gandalf and Saruman, especially. And again, I also really like the little wacky rabbit sled thing, which I don't know if that's from because I don't remember in the Lord of the Rings books.
I don't remember.
I think it is, but I could be wrong about that. Also played by Sylvester McCoy, the Seventh Doctor. Yeah, that actor as well was the Doctor once.
I've never watched any of the original Doctor Who.
So once they getting back to the troll scene again now, I really like in the movie that they have the reason they discover the trolls is that some of the ponies have gone missing. Yeah. And Bilbo and Keely and Feely, I think, are like kind of trying to figure out where they went, and they see like a fire in the distance, so they go to investigate, and that's where the trolls are, and the trolls have stolen the horses to eat them. And so I really like Bilbo. They're like, well, we got to get the trolls back, and we don't want to tell Thorin because he'll be mad that we, let the ponies get stolen or whatever. So they kind of trying to sort it out themselves. And Bilbo creeps in and they're like, "You're the thief. You're small. They won't even notice you. Go, you can do it." And so he sneaks in, and I like that his motivation for this is trying to free the ponies so they can get the ponies back. Because in the book, he sort of just like they stumble across the trolls and they send Bilbo in to investigate. And then while he's there, he's just like, I guess I'll steal.
I think I'll try burgling.
Yeah, he just kind of decides, I'm a burglar. I guess I should try to steal something, and it's like going to take something out of their
Yeah, he's
wallet
gonna
or
like
whatever.
pickpocket them.
Yeah, and so I like having it like be this thing where they took the ponies. We're gonna try to get the ponies back. I think that's a really good change.
And in particular, they have the Bilbo's pony.
Yes,
as well,
which we set up with a little scene
we have
that he
seen
likes his
him
pony.
bond
Yes.
with his pony.
Again, I thought that was a very good, smart decisions.
Also, I'm just going to tack this on here because I think it makes as most sense as anything. But I like that the movies didn't kill any of the ponies.
This is true.
At least not in narrative, because we talked about some of the issues they had with animal safety on the set.
Yeah.
But at least in the narrative,
yes,
none of the ponies die. They run away at some point.
Yeah, they're like the ponies
bolted.
Yeah.
But from there on out, we're ponyless.
Right.
And the book kills like 2 or 3 rounds of ponies.
They keep getting ponies.
Yeah.
Losing them. Yeah.
I also like in this scene that it's Bilbo who stalls the trolls.
Completely agree.
Because it's Gandalf who does it in the book.
Yeah, Gandalf, who has been gone this whole time, shows up and is like from the trees, like throwing his voice and confusing the trolls by like pretending to be one of them, essentially.
Yeah.
And getting them to argue with each other. And so
I think it's a really nice character moment for Bilbo, and we're kind of showing that he is very clever and he can be useful.
Yeah, and it's also a good comedy beat because this is already a funny scene. Even in the book, it's like a comical scene. And so having it be like he's like talking about like how to cook them and like, oh, you should skin them first, and they're like, no, what are you talking about? Like, and then I love the line. It cracks me up every time. I forgot about this line, but he's like, well, you don't want to eat that one. He's got worms in his tubes because he's just trying to come up with anything and he can't. And then they're all like, we don't have parasites. And then they realize what he's doing and they're like, oh no, I'm full of parasites. I'm nothing but parasites. I liked all that a lot. I thought that was fun. And I also like in the book, the sun just rises and hits them and they turn to stone. I actually like the movie change of, since we gave Frodo or Bilbo the moment of stalling them.
Yeah.
We give Gandalf still a moment where he shows up and he splits this big rock that is blocking the sun. Cause it's like, there's this big like cliff kind of rock thing that is keeping the sun from hitting them. And he slams his staff on it and it splits in two and falls over. And then the sun is able to hit and I thought that was a cool, like dramatic moment to reveal the sun, and also makes it very sudden. Cause otherwise you have to show this like slow creeping, like just visually, like it works fine describing it in the book, but like visually in a film, that moment of like when they get hit by the sun and turn to stone, if that's like a slow gradual sunrise, it's hard to make that like super thrilling. I don't know. I just think it's a very smart way to do it in the movie of having him hit that rock and split it, which allows the sun to hit them.
Yeah. The movie adds like a chase scene as they're going to Rivendell. There's like Azog's not there, but it's some orcs. It's orcs
other,
on
like,
wargs,
generals or whatever.
And Radagast is also there, and he's like drawing them away. And I understand, and I don't mind adding an action beat there. I get it. It made me feel a little motion sick, though.
Yeah, I honestly had this. This is kind of one of those ones that's like a mixed. I think I probably had this in better in the book because it doesn't include this. Because it's another one of those moments where the chase with Radagast and the wargs and him riding around on the sled is very fun in theory. But again, pretty mediocre in execution, in my opinion. One, it is kind of nauseating a little bit at times. But also, I just thought the way it's staged and like executed makes like very little sense. Because the whole idea is that Radagast is gonna like lead the wargs a different direction so that our band of dwarves and Gandalf and them can run away the other way. Like he's gonna lead the wargs away from them. But then over the course of the chase, seemingly our band of dwarves are running like with Radagast. I
didn't understand where anyone was trying to go.
Where is anybody trying to go?
Scene.
Why is so long? Like even towards the end of this scene, Radagast is still like right next to them. Isn't the whole point that he's on this very fast thing and could lead them running way in the other direction? How would our people be even keeping up with him in any way? They're on foot. Two, why would they even be near each other? Like, he would go one direction and they would go the other direction, but somehow they're like watching him across the field. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And it's one of those moments that feels like it's a fun idea, but then we didn't really figure out how we were going to execute it. So we just kind of made it up as we went, which again, we've talked about is a thing that Peter Jackson has fully admitted happened in these movies quite a bit. And so it just doesn't make any sense to me. Again, good idea, poorly executed. I really like giving Thorin, in my opinion, some additional character. In the book, at least so far, he's not a particularly interesting or fleshed out character.
He's just kind of there.
He's just kind of the leader of the group.
Yeah.
And so we've talked about like the setting up all the duty bound stuff earlier and like him wanting to take back the mountain because, you know, and obviously that's there in the book, but we don't really explore it very much. Whereas in the movie, we get a little more exploration of it. I also like making him an elf racist because it gives him a character arc. Like, it gives him a good arc. It's an arc we've seen specifically with Gimli before. Like, it's literally the exact same arc. But that being said, it's at least something that is interesting and gives him, you know, some room to grow as a person and become, you know, gives him somewhere to go as opposed to just being like the stoic leader, which is kind of what he is in the book.
Yeah.
I actually also don't mind when we get up into the mountains in the film and they sleep in the cave after the whole stone giant thing. In the film, Bilbo decides he's going to leave, like, because mainly because Thorin has just yelled at him and been like, "You don't belong here," blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And Bilbo's like, "You're right, I'm getting the fuck out of here," and he goes to leave. And I like he has a little heart to heart with Beaufort, I believe it is, and they have a discussion about like, you know, he's like, "I don't belong here. You guys don't have a home. Sorry, you know, but you don't have a home. I do. I got a hobbit hole. It's real comfy. I'm just gonna go back there." Blah blah blah, and that all kind of gets upended by the trap happening or whatever. But I like setting up the fact that he was like literally going to leave, so that when we get to the end of this movie and he has the chance with the ring to just leave, we know he's already considered it. And so you know, as a moviegoer, if you didn't have any idea where the story was going, you don't know, like, he could very well just leave in that moment. And so I really like that little moment of having him like consider leaving there to set up, again, the end, and then having him choose to stay. Again, similar to having him choose to go on the adventure as opposed to Gandalf kind of forcing him out. Just
more agency for Bilbo.
A little more agency for Bilbo.
I don't think this happened in the book.
I don't think
I don't remember this happening in the book, but when they're in the caves, and the goblins take them.
Yeah.
We see Sting glow.
Yes, because as he's leaving, like, before, he's like, "All right, I'm gonna leave," and then Beaufort's like, "What's going on there?" And he looks down and he pulls Sting out and it's glowing blue, and they're like, "Oh shit."
Yeah. I thought that was a good addition.
Yeah. I also like the weird sand trap thing that they have there. In the book, there's like apparently just like a door kind of, they say like a crack in the wall, but some sort of door opens in the back of the cave and the goblins come out and just like take them captive and drag them down into the caves. In the movie, the like floor like splits open and it's like sand and they all fall through. And I thought that was kind of cool because the book does mention that the goblins are like good at building specific kinds of things. Like, they're very inventive in their own way. And that kind of weird trap thing feels like something they could make or would make. And it makes for a fun kind of way for them to get captured. That's a less awkward than just a bunch of goblins coming out and like grabbing them while they're sleeping. I don't know. It's just more fun. I liked that.
Another thing that I really liked, after Bilbo falls down and he's with Gollum, and Gollum has like dragged the goblin away, and we see Gollum like pick up a rock and kill this goblin, and then Sting like blinks out and stops glowing. I thought
that was a really good addition too, because you're like, well, obviously it's got to go off on and off somehow. Yeah. And in this case, like, it's also a really good beat too, because one, it's like, oh, that's how it works. Like, if the goblin's alive,
great explanation of
how that works. But also, it lets you know Gollum, not a goblin.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's another little subtle element of it, is like, you now know, and Bilbo knows it, because he knows what the blade does, right? At that point, I think, Gandalf has explained it to him at this point, so he knows. So it's also a little thing like, oh, well, that's not a goblin. What is who is this guy? What's this little freak deal?
He is indeed a little freak.
Yeah. So this is the point in the film where our Lost in Adaptation drop comes from, and it is not exactly in the book. So I had to put this in better in the movie because I mean, I have to. It's it's an element of our show. That being said, it kind of is in the book. It's just like in two different places and not exactly the same words. There's like one part where he says part of it, like where Gollum asks, like, "Are you lost?" or whatever, and then there's another part later where he says the line you have here, where he says, "I want to get unlost." Yeah, but the exact specific line that is the part in our show is not in the book. So better in the movie. This is something I alluded to earlier. You talked about how in the book you liked some of the humanity of, or the hobbit-manity, the halfling manity, whatever you want to call it, of Smeagol, Gollum, in the book scene during the riddle game, of some of his humanity kind of bleeding back in, and that being really sad and stuff. A little detail that is not in the book that I really liked in the movie is that the riddle game ends up starting in the movie because he's like mentioning games and he's like gets excited about the idea of playing a game, and then decides he's gonna kill Bilbo, but then Bilbo's like, "Oh, actually no, let's play a game," and like he's like, "All right, let's play a game," and like in the book, I don't know, it doesn't play out that way. Like there's not this moment of like Gollum getting excited about the prospect of playing a game because it reminds him of his past life or whatever. And I really liked that. I liked that I don't know, the way that all started up in the book or in the film felt noticeably different than the book, and I really enjoyed it. I also really liked the line in that interaction where they're discussing where Bilbo's like, "If I win, you got to show me how to get out of here." And Gollum says, "And if I win, I eats the hobbit whole." And the music cuts out and Bilbo just stares at him and is like, "Okay." It's very funny. I love that.
We already talked at length about Bilbo not killing Gollum while he's invisible.
Yeah.
But he jumps over him to get out of the cave,
book,
which does come from the book. But I thought it was funny that he like smacks him in the face.
Yeah. I don't know if he did that on purpose or not in the movie, but he does seem he kicks him in the head.
Yeah.
Whether it's on purpose or not, it's very funny. So after he gets out, he sees all of the dwarves and Gandalf escape down the mountainside, and Bilbo sees them escaping and then comes and finds them, very similar to the book, and decides to surprise them by coming around the corner and being like, "Haha, I'm alive," to impress them. But after he does that in the movie, they're like, "Well, why did you come back?" or what, like, blah, that sort of thing. And he gives this speech in the film that I actually really liked, that it's not in the book at all. And it's really not like his motivation for like why he's helping them doesn't really ever get addressed, at least so far in the book.
Yeah.
And I thought the speech was really sweet about how he has this home that he loves with all these people that he loves and blah, 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 but that the dwarves don't. And again, maybe muddled by the fact that they seemingly had created their own home in the Blue Mountains, but whatever. Their home has been stolen. They've been kicked out of their home by
hobbits understand the value of a home.
Yes. And so he gives this and I thought Martin Short just delivers it perfectly, like pitch perfectly. And throughout the whole movie, all the performances are great, but in particular, I think Martin Short does a very good young Bilbo. Martin Short.
I was really questioning myself. I was like, do I not know who this actor is?
Martin Freeman. Martin Short playing Bilbo would be hilarious, though. I think I only wrote Martin Short because hobbits are short, and his name is Martin Freeman. And so my brain just went Martin Short. Martin Short, in case you're blanking on who that is most notably for us would be one of the main characters in Only Murders in the Building.
Oh, yeah.
Not Steve Martin, the other guy who only eats dips. That's Martin Short, that actor. And he's a comedian as well. But he would have back in the day. He could have done a Bilbo. Well, he's not British, but he could have done a Bilbo.
Yeah.
But yes, sorry, Martin Freeman.
You really had me questioning reality there for a minute. I was like, do I not remember the name of the person? Because I said Martin Freeman earlier, and I was like, oh no, did I get it wrong?
No, literally, I think my brain just went Hobbit Short, Martin Short. I have no idea. Anyways, yes, Martin Freeman. I think he does great.
So we've been over my feelings and your feelings about Azog But as long as we're doing that, I liked that we have Bilbo like jump in to save Thorin.
Yeah.
In the
I wasn't
last battle.
sure how I was going to feel about that, but I did like it. Again, there's not really any battle in the book. There's not really any sort of the goblins show up, but then they just get rescued out of the tree by
they tree them and then they get rescued. There's not like a fight.
Like a fight or anything like that. I really love the whole showdown with Azog. I think it's super. The shot of Thorin coming out of that tree with the flames everywhere and it's just fucking cool. Like whatever. I get people would have issues with Azog and stuff and whatever. I just think it's really cool. That being said, I don't love everything about this. Him just getting immediately wrecked was kind of like, but it works for his character because again,
he's brash.
He's brash, and he thinks he's a badass.
Yeah, he doesn't think things through.
Yeah, and he just kind of goes to challenge him and immediately gets wrecked. I don't think that doesn't not work, but a couple things. One, I thought there was a really funny editing moment in this scene where when Bilbo does come save him, he comes flying in as that one other orc general guy is about to like cut his head off, and he like slams into that guy and then like stabs him, and Bilbo kills that other orc. But we see Bilbo, and at this point, Thorin is laying on the ground, mortally injured because the
like actively dying.
The warg has like bitten him and thrown him across the.
We heard bones crack.
Yeah, and so he's like bleeding out and like dying or whatever. And he's laying there on the ground, like right next to Bilbo, and we see Bilbo fighting this orc, and he like plunges his sword into him. And right after he plunges his sword into him, we cut to Thorin, and his eyes, like blink shut, like he's dying. And then it cuts back to Bilbo like jumping off and pulling his sword out, and the edit makes it feel like Bilbo just stabbed Thorin in the chest and killed him. Obviously, that's not what's going on. And you can tell what's going on, but I just thought that edit was very funny because it
was a very odd
They
edit.
should not have put the shot. It would have been fine if they had just not put the shot of Thorin's eyes shutting right where they did. They should have just moved that somewhere else. Anyways, I thought that was very funny. The only thing, or the other thing I don't like is I like having Thorin lose that fight and be injured.
Yeah.
I don't really love him seemingly dying.
Yeah. It was hard to tell.
Yeah.
If he was like definitely
dead or just very injured.
Very close to death.
But then we have him like kind of resurrected mere moments later by Gandalf. So there's not even that much of, if they had taken it to the next movie, like maybe that would have been something, but they just kind of immediately have Gandalf be like, mutter some words over him and he's fine. And I think it would have been totally fine to just have him get injured and need Bilbo's help, and Bilbo saves him, but he's not like mortally injured. Yeah. He's just like kind of severely injured and then is like nursing a wound for a little bit at the beginning of the next movie or something. That would have been totally fine. Another example to me of like a good idea mid execution, because it's like, why kill it? Like, why seemingly kill him? Like, are we doing a Jesus thing here? Like truly, like, is that what we're going for? Like, I don't know, because I just don't understand the point of having him be so grievously injured only to immediately have him be seemingly fine. Because like at the end of the movie, he stands up and he's like walking and he seems fine.
You know, I'm now constructing a Jesus parallel in my mind. He does have disciples. They're almost 12.
I know. I do think that's what we're doing. I just think it's like, why?
I agree.
Because like it doesn't really matter. I don't know. I just think it's a dumb illusion if that's what we're doing. Like if we're alluding to like the Jesus, I just don't think it really necessarily.
It doesn't really serve any kind of purpose.
You know. I don't know. He ends up being the savior of his people or whatever, and like I think that is probably what we're going for. If I had to guess, I just don't care for that as an allegory, and I also think it is kind of cheapened by having him literally. Again, if you're going to do that, at least commit to it a little longer. Like have the movie end with us.
Commit to 3 days. Yeah, damn it.
Have the movie end with us being unsure.
Yeah,
is Thorin going to survive? Like they see that, you know. I don't know. I just. Either don't do it or commit to it, and what they did I think was like the worst version. But I will say this, I did like having Thorin renounce his, you know, how he's been very judgmental of Bilbo. I think having him after they get to the mountaintop and he's been healed or whatever, and again, this would have been fine. You could do the exact same thing if he'd never like seemingly died, if he had just been grievously injured or whatever, had like a broken arm or whatever. Having him come and go to Bilbo and be like, look, I was wrong about you. I think that's I think it's an actual conclusion to this movie's kind of narrative arc
Yeah.
and character arcs, I think it makes a lot of sense. It gives us a satisfying ending for this movie. So I like that a lot. I like this little line that does not show up in the book where they're staring at the lonely mountain in the distance and they're talking about how tough things have been. And Bilbo says, "You're right. I do believe the worst is behind us," which is a fun little foreshadow of what's to come. And then the movie ends on, I think, a fun tease for the sequels by setting up and giving us a little glimpse of Smaug by having we see the thresh, whatever that bird is, thresh.
I think it was a thrush. Yeah.
Banging the snail against the thing and it echoing through the halls, and then we come inside and see Smaug. That being said, it looks a little
The piles of gold are like so painfully CGI.
Yes.
Like they remind me of the super early computer animation parts of the Cave of Wonders in 1992's Aladdin.
Yeah.
Like where it suddenly looks like a video game.
Yes. I would agree with that. It's not the best. Like Smaug himself looks fine, like the eye and the dragon, but the gold looks not amazing. And so but again, I like the idea of it. It just maybe could have used a little more time in the oven for the CG, but it's all good. All right, that was all the stuff we thought was better in the movie. We're going to talk about now all the stuff that the movie nailed.
As I expected, practically perfect in every way.
I like we open up they nail the opening line between Bilbo and Gandalf, where Gandalf shows up and says, or Bilbo says to him, "Good morning." And Gandalf says, "Do you wish me a good morning, or mean that it is a good morning whether I want it or not, or that you feel good this morning, or that it is a morning to be good on?" Which is the exact line out of the book, and it's fun. And the enjoyable kind of comedy that the book has a lot of, so.
There were a lot of lines, particularly in the opening bit of the movie, that came straight from the book. For example, when Gandalf says he's looking for somebody to share in an adventure, and Bilbo replies, I don't like adventures, nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things, makes you late for dinner.
I don't know what anybody sees in them. Is like it's great. I love that.
And then Gandalf's line as well, I am Gandalf, and Gandalf means me.
Yes. Yeah. I like that we see him scratched a little rune on the door to let the dwarves know where the meeting spot is.
Yeah.
So they're able to find it.
The Jaunty Dishes song.
Yes.
As well.
They sing the song while they taunt Bilbo about how he hates them breaking their dishes. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Gandalf has the secret key. The key
that he
to
got
Erebor.
from Thrain.
Yeah, gives it to Thorin.
I imagine we might get more of that because this movie mentions Thrain going missing.
Yeah.
And in the book, Gandalf says that he found Thrain. He rescued Thrain from the Necromancer.
Yeah, from the dungeons of the Necromancer.
Yes, which is where the Necromancer plot comes from. But he says that Thrain was like, his brain was cooked. He was done. So we'll see if that comes up later.
Another thing that I feel like the movie nailed is that Gandalf like super duper believes in Bilbo and like really wants him to go on this journey for reasons that that both the audience and the other characters
and Bilbo himself
are unaware of.
Yes. Yeah.
None of us understand the inner workings of Gandalf's mind in this moment.
Yeah. We're like, I guess if you say so, man. Yeah. I like we see the contract of all the remunerations and funeral agreements and stuff. It's got all the little like subsections about all the different things that Bilbo is signing up for. I like they even expand on it a little bit in the movie where it's like incinerations, and they're like, and they're like going through all the different ways he could die. I like that the movie nails that Gandalf mentions the fact that Bilbo used to be an adventurous young hobbit, that he has Took ancestors, and the Tooks are notorious for being adventurers among the hobbits. And we also get the anecdote that one of his ancestors, some Took, killed a goblin way back in the day and knocked his head off, and it went down a hole.
He was big enough that he could ride a horse.
Yes. And he knocked a goblin's head off and it went down a hole, and that's how golf was invented.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hobbits canonically invented golf.
Yes.
We mentioned earlier that they do keep Bilbo forgetting his handkerchief.
Yeah.
And then specifically the line Gandalf says, "You will have to manage without pocket handkerchiefs and a great many other things." The trolls argue about eating mutton.
Yeah.
Mutton every night. It's so boring.
Nice little muttonless tomato where the mutton's nice and thin. Yeah. I love that the trolls get the word hobbit wrong, because Bilbo, when they ask like what he is, he's like, I'm a he says, I'm a burglar hobbit. He like, in the middle of saying burglar, he stops and says hobbit. And so they call him Burr a Hobbit in the book. And they say, I think they keep calling him different things in the movie. Like they keep getting it wrong in different ways. But like at one point, one of them does say like burglar hobbit or something like that, which I thought was funny.
There's a little exchange between Gandalf and Thorin, I believe, that's out of the book, where one of the points at which Gandalf has vanished from the party, and Thorin's like, well, why did you leave? And he says, to look ahead. And he said, well, what brought you back? Looking behind.
Yeah.
And then they do find the elf swords, as well as some treasure, which they bury in the troll cave, and they bury that treasure for later.
Yes, they do.
They gotta save it.
Absolutely. And this is honestly, because we see this in Lord of the Rings as well, but it is mentioned in this one, the bridge to Rivendell, or that gets into Rivendell, where the last homely house, is a very narrow stone bridge that they say they can only walk over in single file, and that it has no railings or anything. And that is exactly what the bridge to Rivendell looks like. And again, we saw it in Lord of the Rings, and it's the same in this one, but that does come from the book.
Moon runes.
Yep.
As well.
Runes. They call them moon letters in the book, but it's close enough.
I like moon runes.
Moon runes is fun. They do say runes as well, but he specifically says they're moon letters or whatever. Yeah. They also reveal the same thing about Durin's
like the
Day
secret door and all
sort of
that
stuff.
Both the book and the movie fat shame Bomber. Stone giants are from the book. I did think that in the movie they kind of looked like Rock'em Sock'em robots.
Again, it's fine. Like, I don't know how else you would do it necessarily. It looks pretty good. Like the effects actually look pretty great. It's just like the way they move does kind of, and like the design kind of looks like Rock'em Sock'em robots.
They look like, I was imagining something more along the lines of, I'm thinking of something specific, but I don't know what it is exactly. Like I can kind of see it in my head, but I'm not sure what it's from. But remember the snow monster from Frozen?
No. I'm sorry. It's been so long since I've seen Frozen. I do not.
I was picturing something more like that, but made out of stone.
Yeah. Again, I think they look okay. It's just they are a little. That whole scene is like fine. Yeah, it's not. It's fine. The whole part where they're like on the knees and they get split up and like, it's a little. It's whatever. I don't think it was necessary. I think we could have just watched them. It feels a little action scene for action scene's sake.
Yeah, and that is like kind of another overarching issue that goes hand in hand with like the messiness of the action scenes in this movie. Is that I do feel like this movie is kind of doing the most, but it does not possess the, I don't want to say skill, but
well, they just didn't have the time to make it all work.
They don't. It doesn't possess like what it needs and able to be able to do the most well.
Yeah, like I said, I like that scene overall. I don't think it's like terrible or anything, and it's not nearly as like, I don't know. It's just fine is I guess the best explanation for it. Whereas I think it also would have been totally fine for that scene to not be like this like action scene where they get split up and they gotta like, jump. It could have just been they see the stone giants, which is what it is in the book. They just see them like throwing rocks,
and then they get to a cave as fast as they can.
That would have been fine. We didn't need like this little mini action set piece there. I just don't think it was necessary, but it's fine.
The line "caves in the mountains are seldom unoccupied" comes from the book. As well as, I love this little line from Gollum. Bless us and splash us, precious. I can't do a Gollum voice, so I'm not even going to try. Yeah. But I really like that line.
I also love that we see him paddling his little boat across the lake. Which is mentioned in the book.
And I think all, or at least most of the riddles are from the book.
I believe all the riddles are from the book. I just don't think they use every single riddle that's in the book. I think there are more in the book, is from my memory. I think we see like 4 or 5 of them in the film, and I think there's like a few more than that in the book. I would have to go back and double check, but I think there's at least 1 or 2 from the book that don't make it into the film, which is fine.
That's fine.
I love how clumsy during the riddle scene where at the end Gollum is like coming after him and is like gonna attack him, and Bilbo's trying to like fend him off with the sword and just like awkwardly swinging it around because he has no idea how to use a sword. He's like literally first time he's ever held a sword. And I thought that was fun. I thought they did a good job showcasing that he has no idea what he's doing. I really liked that in one of the riddles, the teeth riddle, because he says like there's 30 white horses on a hill is like the beginning of the riddle or whatever. And after Gollum figures it out and says teeth, and he goes, but I only have 6 in the book. I think he says 6, but in the movie he says 9 or whatever. But it's the same fun line, and it's great. He like smiles and shows his like 9 teeth that he has. And as always, Andy Serkis just absolutely steals the show.
He just does such a great job with Gollum.
Ridiculous. It's absurd. I can't fathom anybody else doing Gollum, and he's incredible. I liked that they kept the detail because I didn't remember this in the book, but I think it's a very important little detail, and I'm glad the movie kept it. That when Bilbo does the what's in my pocket riddle, he doesn't do that as a riddle.
Yeah, not initially. Yeah.
He says it to himself. He sticks his hand in his pocket while he's trying to think of a riddle, and because he forgot the ring was even there, feels the ring and goes, "What have I got in my pocket?" And he says it out loud, and Gollum hears that and is like, "What?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, that's my riddle." Because like Bilbo knows that's not a real riddle and knows he's kind of cheating, but just kind of goes with it because Gollum seems to like let him go with it. So he's like, "Okay, yeah, that's the riddle." And I like they kept that detail because for some reason in my head I thought it was literally that was just like that Bilbo came up with that as like a trick. He's like, I'll ask him what's in. I don't know, but I like that it's like an innocent accident that ends up being the thing that allows him to win this this riddle battle or whatever. Not that it ultimately really matters because Gollum's still just gonna kill him anyways, and he has to escape with the ring. But I like it.
It's in a slightly different place, but we do get the scene where Bilbo's trying to like squeeze through the crack and all of his buttons pop off of his vest.
Yes.
I wish they would have done it while he was invisible.
So you see the buttons
the buttons come out of nowhere. But it's still pretty close to what's in the book.
Pretty much, yeah. Gandalf does show up to rescue the dwarves in Goblin Town. He disappeared it's slightly different in the movie in the sense that he hasn't been with them since Rivendell in the film, whereas in the book he's been there the whole time, but when they get captured in the cave he disappears and they don't know what happened to him. And then he shows up close enough, but he does show up at the last minute, come in and save them all and then slay the great goblin.
And then as they're
going down the hill,
after they escape from the goblins, and then we see the orcs are coming. And Thorin says, "Out of the frying pan and into the fire."
Gandalf says it, I believe.
Oh, Gandalf says it
in the movie, I think. Yeah.
No,
I could be wrong. I thought it was Gandalf, but one of the two.
It doesn't matter. I have it in here because it's one of the title chapters in the book,
which they actually do quite a bit of. They mention the chapter names as like line. They use the chapter names as lines quite a bit in the movie.
Gandalf's fireballs when they're up in the trees. I love that the wizard uses fireball in this.
Yes.
It's so D&D coded. I love that.
I love the flaming pine cones. He lights pine cones on fire, which is exactly what he does in the book. The only thing that I understand why they didn't do it, mainly for the big final showdown, but I still think they could have done it. But in the book, the pine cones that he lights on fire are not just regular fire. He has like red and blue and green flames. I thought that would have been cool to be like throwing different color fireball pine cones at him, but I think they just wanted at the end when the big battle just like regular. They didn't want like blue and green flames in the background. But
cowards,
whatever.
My last note here is just a note about how much I love the eagles in these stories.
Yeah.
I really love that Tolkien was like, I can have a little Deus Ex Machina,
just a little,
as a treat.
Yes,
Yeah.
I had the same note for Nail that they show up to save the day. I think it's a fun climax, plays out similarly, but this is slightly better in the movie note for me. I do like that the movie has Gandalf call them. Like he gets a moth like he does in the Lord of the Rings movie, which I think is not also similarly like not exactly how it plays out in the books from my memory.
Yeah.
But anyways, I like that callback to having him use a moth or whatever. But even if that wasn't a callback, even if this was the first time we ever saw him do it, I like having him call for help from the eagles, because in the book it's revealed that the eagles are they live in the mountains nearby.
Yeah, they just live nearby.
And they like notice a commotion happening and they go to investigate and then end up saving them. But then it turns out that they know Gandalf, and Gandalf is like friends with the leader of the eagles or whatever. And so to me, it just makes sense to have, as opposed to it being like a coincidence.
Yeah.
Having Gandalf, like, he knows where they are. He knows the eagles are nearby, and he knows, because the book specifically mentions that like he has helped them before, and so they like owe him or whatever. And so him like calling in a favor makes perfect sense to me. And I think, especially in the movie, you don't have to then explain. In the book, we can just read, oh, nearby, that you like, it totally works that the eagles are just live in the area, and the book can just explain that.
I think it fits tonally with the book as well.
I think that's fine, but I think it makes more sense in the movie. It would be like a weird stretch. Audiences would be going, wait, the eagles just were there? Like, why did they're just randomly there? You know what I mean? Like, I don't think it's an issue with the book. I just think for the movie, having Gandalf call to them for help makes a lot of sense.
No, I agree.
All right, that was everything that we talked about that the movie nailed. We do have some stuff to discuss in Lost in Adaptation.
Just show me the way to get out of here, and I'll be on my way.
Where is it lost?
Yes, and I want to get unlost as soon as possible.
So this isn't really a normal Lost in Adaptation, which would normally be like if we were confused about things, which I guess we're going to get into a little bit. Or sometimes we make it a discussing the themes thing, which we're not really going to do here. But
yeah, I was kind of pooling my thoughts on a specific topic.
Yeah.
In this section.
Well, and we had to include it so we could include the drop. So we had to have a Lost in Adaptation.
Yes, so. That's true. We have to include that in this series. So now we have touched on this already, kind of throughout the idea that the movies have like really good ideas.
Yeah.
And my first note here that I had was that like, so the book does mention the necromancer. So I think that is something that it makes sense to expand out into the larger story, at least on paper.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
I had this in better in the movie because, like you said, Gandalf mentions it very explicitly. Talks about, I mentioned earlier, how he rescued Thrain, or tried to rescue Thrain from the necromancer, and now he barely escaped himself. I also like that there's a little mention in the book, which isn't mentioned in the movie, that Thorin wants to like get revenge on the necromancer, and Gandalf's like, that's not something we can do. That guy is way too strong. But I know there's more of it in the future movies. I don't remember how much or how that plays out.
Yeah.
I may hate it later.
I'm sure that is something we're going to come back to.
Yes. But so far, what we get of it in this movie, I liked the addition, the expansion of it. So,
but like something that I was kind of struggling with throughout was that like, it makes sense on paper, again, to connect this whole thing to Lord of the Rings and to like make all of those connections, and I don't think it even contradicts. Like, it
doesn't seem like, I'm sure it probably does in some very specific ways or whatever, but yeah.
But to me, it just like feels a lot of the time so fan servicey.
I don't disagree necessarily, but to me it was fan service that worked. At least this time, because I actually think I had that thought about it the first time I watched these movies, especially this first one, like the whole scene where the White Council, where Gandalf and Saruman and Galadriel and Elrond get together, felt a little bit like, all right, this is what we're doing. It's getting back like the greatest hits and like putting them all in a room together to like, like I get that. That being said, I really liked it. I enjoyed that Saruman like dresses Gandalf down for like helping the dwarves, and he kind of acts like a kid being caught by his teacher. I thought was kind of fun. I liked that dynamic between them. And I liked this whole scene. I will say I'm not really exactly sure why, I guess we'll find out more later, why Saruman feels the need to like tell Gandalf that he can't help the dwarves and they can't go on their mission. I assume Saruman is in some capacity in alliance with Smaug I don't know. Well, maybe we'll get more.
I think I'm sure we'll get more in the upcoming films. I think it's an attempt to play with dramatic irony, because theoretically the viewer knows that Saruman ends up being a villain, but like nobody else in this scene
clearly, yeah.
knows. And I only call it an attempt because I can't imagine it would work if you aren't already familiar with Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, well, and it's also, I will say, it does get a little confusing because I'm not exactly sure how much it works that the scene ends with Saruman being like, your quest's over, you guys can't, I'm putting a kibosh on this whole going and taking back Erebor thing, and then it's revealed that like Gandalf already sent the dwarves off because he knew that Saruman would stop. Why would he know that? At this point, he should trust Saruman entirely because he trusts Saruman still in the Lord of the Rings, which is 60 years later.
Yeah.
Why would he have had suspicions about what? Now, I think you could argue that it's less about like he thinks Saruman is evil or anything, and more so that just he knows Saruman has like a very stickler about like intervening and stuff, and might not just like him being involved in this or whatever. And so I think that kind of could work or whatever. Again, I get why people don't like this and why, and it does feel fan servicey. I think I've heard people say this is like their least favorite parts of the movies of like incorporating all this. To me, I think I used to feel that way, and I don't think it's all executed perfectly, but I really enjoyed it this time. I liked exploring this stuff that we know was happening during the Hobbit story,
right?
Especially because we would this, or at least to some extent, was happening. Because we know about the necromancer stuff. We know some of that other stuff was going on. We know Gandalf just kind of disappeared. It's like a running joke that Gandalf just like disappears for a while and then shows back up again.
Yeah.
In this and in Lord of the Rings. And so I liked this, and I thought the scenes mostly worked. I enjoyed it. I understand why people wouldn't. I thought it worked fairly well. It's maybe not executed perfectly, but I enjoyed directly tying these films to the Lord of the Rings sequels more concretely, or the Lord of the Rings films more concretely. I was a fan of it this time, which I don't think I was last time I watched these.
I don't know. Maybe fan service isn't like quite the right word.
I think it is.
Like, I mean, for me personally,
yeah.
Just like as much as I love Lord of the Rings, and I do love Lord of the Rings, I just think it's a little bit of a crime that an adaptation of The Hobbit wasn't given a chance to stand on its own more.
I think that's fair. I do think an adaptation of The Hobbit that was not so deeply tied to the Lord of the Rings could have worked entirely. I think it would have been great. That being said, I don't mind at all the decision to tie it to it as much as it is, because it inherently is. Like, it's even the book is inherently tied, you know, obviously it came out before, and so it's tied to it in a different way, but like, I don't know. I think the stories are inherently tied together in both the book and in the movies, and trying to like to explicitly like fight against the urge to like incorporate them. I think you're fighting a losing battle that you don't need to fight, in my opinion.
Well, I don't mind all of it.
Yeah.
I'm not like totally against every single inclusion of something from Lord of the Rings.
Right. Yeah.
I do think it's interesting how the separate histories of these two like properties have affected and influenced each other, both as books and as movies. I feel like there's a lot of times where it seems like the movie The Hobbit is kind of forced to be self-referential. Like, when Bilbo finds the ring, we shouldn't know anything about it yet. Right? Like, we shouldn't know that it's special or interesting. Yeah. But the truth is that we do.
Yes, because
of Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
So then, therefore, the movie is duty bound to treat it like it is special, because the movie knows that the audience knows that.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that every single instance of that works. Like, in particular, Like the moment where the ring falls onto Bilbo's finger, like
Right.
felt a lot to me.
Oh, it's
like
very clearly a reference to.
well, it's obviously a reference to Fellowship, but it also felt a lot like, you know, the filmmakers were sitting around going like, oh, let's do this again. Let's do this again. People loved that. Like there's stuff that works, and then there's other stuff that to me ends up feeling like an aging rock star playing the greatest hits because that's what everybody loves.
I don't even disagree with that. I think you're right. And I do think that's why a lot of people have issues with some of that stuff. And I don't even entirely disagree. I think there are moments of it. Like I said, I mentioned that in the beginning with some of the way they tie in the Frodo like stuff to like some of that got a little heavy handed. And there are moments like that. The ring falling on his finger the same way. I didn't have a problem with. I like those kind of like visual parallels. Actually, initially I had the same thought, just kind of narrowing down to the specific moment of the ring falling onto Bilbo's hand for the first time being a direct visual reference to the first time it falls on Frodo's hand in the Green Dragon or wherever they are, the hotel, the bar or whatever. Like right,
the Prancing Pony.
Prancing Pony, that's right. Having that be a direct visual reference, initially I was like, that's not necessary. Like, why would we do that? Because like in the book, what happens is Bilbo's just like stumbling around and like his hand is in his pocket and it like kind of slips into the ring and he puts it on. But then I'm like, okay, well, how would you show that? Like what is described in the book? How would I show that in a movie in a way that's visually interesting at all? His hand's going into his pocket and the ring slip like. Okay, so we got to come up with a way for him to get the ring on that feels accidental, because it is accidental in the book, but also you can see and is visually interesting. Well, I got a pretty good idea of a way that could happen where the ring flies up in the air and he goes to catch it and it falls on his finger. Oh, well, we did exactly that in Lord of the Rings. Okay. You know, it's poetry, it rhymes. Like, sure, like that's a George Lucas quote about Star Wars. Like, I think that kind of thing. Like, so, like, I worked through that I put my filmmaker hat on and I worked through that process of like thinking about how I would adapt that scene from the book. And ultimately I landed on, the thing they did in the movie is exactly what I would do. I would do the exact visual reference to the Lord of the Rings with the ring falling on his finger. That being said, I think there are moments, to your point, that it gets a little heavy-handed where it gets a little like overly referential and fan servicey.
And I'm sure this is a thing that we will come back to.
Oh, absolutely.
As this series progresses.
Because I will agree with this. Like, we haven't gotten there yet. Maybe I'll feel differently when we do. But I don't think Legolas has any point being in this series.
Oh, yeah. I don't think he has any business being here.
And so, like, that kind of thing, I am on board with being like, why the fuck is Legolas in this? Maybe I'll change my mind. Who knows? Maybe I'll be like, no, I love Legolas being here. I don't know. But, like, stuff like that, I'm like, that makes no sense. But, like, certain things and like working the story and seeing like backstory about like, oh, this is what Gandalf was doing, and he was like talking to Saruman and Galadriel about like investigating this necromancer, which the book mentions and we know is Sauron. Finding out more, I think that stuff's all cool and interesting. I don't think it's necessary, but I enjoyed it.
I'm not saying that it's not cool and interesting. And again, I'm not a purist.
Yeah, no, I know, yeah.
I'm not a purist in the sense of Tolkien, and nor am I a purist in the sense of adaptations in general.
Books being holy and having to... No, I know, yeah.
I just truly lament that as much as I love Lord of the Rings, I really do truly lament that because of their popularity, that a Hobbit movie was never going to have a chance to stand on its own without being self-referential like that.
I think it could have been, and we'll get to how it could have been in your final verdict, I think. Because I think it all boils down to the Del Toro of it all. I think
yes.
And the Peter Jackson of it all. I think once this series got... what happened where Del Toro had to quit because of production delays and all that sort of stuff, and it got foisted onto Peter Jackson last minute and he got thrown back into the director's chair. That's when I think any chance of The Hobbit being its own thing died, because of course you now have the exact same director who spent 5-10 years of his life crafting the Lord of the Rings
and
movies.
built his career.
Yes, but even disregarding that, even if we're just talking about like, this is one of his probably the passion project of his entire life will have been creating the Lord of the Rings movies, if I had to guess. Peter Jackson has a lot of passion projects. He's really into the Beatles now or whatever, and weird AI shit. Like, Peter Jackson gets into stuff. He's a severely hyper-focused kind of guy. But point being, I think if you get to the end of the life, if Peter Jackson's writing his memoir and is saying like, what was the singular kind of greatest achievement and creative endeavor of his life, he's gonna say the Lord of the Rings movies, I would have to imagine. And so when you put that guy back in charge of The Hobbit and say, you have 2 months, you're gonna go shoot the Hobbit movies, have fun, how are you gonna get anything other than something that is deeply connected to the Lord of the Rings? Because those consumed that man's life for 10 years.
And this is why I lament.
Yes. Here's the thing. What I would love is have we two, because I actually really, well, I say that. This is all moot because we haven't gotten to the other two movies.
Right.
And I don't even, it's not like I love this movie necessarily, but I actually like a lot of the stuff that they did by tying it to the Lord of the Rings. But I also do wish we had gotten to see the non-Peter Jackson directed version of these movies, or whether it be 2 or 3 or whatever. I would have really loved to see that and have it be its own standalone thing that isn't nearly as tied directly to the Lord of the Rings trilogy. But I also, and I'll fully admit that a lot of it has to do with the fact that it is probably my favorite 3 movies of all time. Like, as a trilogy, the Lord of the Rings are, as much as I love Star Wars, as much as I love other things, the Lord of the Rings are like my favorite like movies. Like, I don't even know if I would put any 3 of the, like any one of them like in my top 3 necessarily on its own, but like as a thing, like the Lord of the Rings are deeply ingrained part of my childhood and my like they're the things I love maybe more than any movies as a whole. And so, like, I fully admit that plays a big role in the fact that I am totally fine with The Hobbit being like, let's explore how The Hobbit intersects with those movies.
Yeah.
And I'm totally fine with Peter Jackson getting to do that. For me, what I had wished is I wish Peter Jackson would have had 2 years to prepare to make his version of The Hobbit.
I'm sure that would have been
fucking
incredible.
sick. Yeah. So
I actually think that maybe as you were talking there, you hit on a difference in the way that you and I are approaching this, because I didn't see Lord of the Rings till I was in college.
Oh, okay.
And I feel like you knew that because I'm sure we probably discussed it.
Yeah.
However, I grew up, as I said, watching the Rankin Bass Hobbit, which to my memory is far more faithful to the text.
I'm sure it is, yeah.
And I do feel like that may be part of it, that we're approaching it kind of from those different, like I was very familiar with The Hobbit before I knew anything about Lord of the Rings.
Right. Yeah, and so like I will say I think there's at least I think I read The Hobbit the book before I ever watched any of the Lord of the Rings movies. Like I think
probably.
I read because they came out when I was like, the first one came out when I was like 13, I think.
Yeah.
And I probably read this when I was like 11 or 12, probably knowing the movies were coming out maybe. And I had not read the Lord of the Rings books, or maybe I had tried reading the Lord of the Rings books and stopped because I found them too boring or whatever, and then ended up reading The Hobbit and read the whole Hobbit and really liked it. So I have attachment to the book. I liked the book as a kid, but yeah, I didn't watch the cartoon. I still don't think I've seen bits of it, but I've never like watched the whole thing or the animated version. And yeah, the movies were just, they were in the same way The Mummy is, they hit me. They came out when I was 13, 15, and 17. I don't know if movies can come out in a time in a person's life that are more foundational to who you are as like in terms of like crafting what you like as in terms of like media and film or whatever, whether it be books, whether it be movies, whether it be the music you like, all that sort of stuff. That time period from 12 to 18 when you are becoming an adult and learning, because that's when you go, that is also the time period when you go from liking everything and not really like being able to discern what is good or what is bad. You're like, before you're like 10 years old, everything's just the same. Like it's all for the most, you know what I mean? Like, do you get what I'm saying?
I get what you're saying.
Yeah, okay. It's just like when you're a little kid, you don't know what's good and bad. You just watch stuff, and as long as it's entertaining and not boring, I guess. Like you're gonna be into it. But you know, like quality wise, you're not really. But like those, from 13 to 18 or whatever, which is when the Lord of the Rings movies came out, and I didn't see the first one in theaters, but I saw the second and third one in theaters.
You're starting to develop taste.
Yes, exactly. And so the fact that you're developing taste in that period, and those are the movies that were like, yeah, they're just foundational to kind of what I enjoy in film in general. And so I have a deep attachment to them. And so in that regard, I think that's why, for me, the fact that the movies are like, let's do more of that. I think it is to the detriment of the film in some ways, which we'll get into in my final verdict. But it's in other ways other than like incorporating the story and having references. That stuff I think is fine. I think what is a problem is the tonal differences, which I'll talk about in my final verdict. So, all right. Woo! That's it for Lost in Adaptation. We have a few odds and ends before we get to the final verdict. I think I've mentioned this before. I know I've talked about the concept about how we occasionally have a medieval feast for dinner.
Yeah,
we've mentioned this. I actually started doing that because of this movie.
Really?
I saw this movie in theaters, and the opening scene where they're all eating all of Bilbo's food. I got out of the movie, and I decided I wanted to do that, and so I went to the store and I bought a rotisserie chicken, a big block of cheese, a giant loaf of bread, and a bunch of like tomatoes and stuff, and I think like a bottle of wine or beer or something, and just ate it all with my hands. I think while I watched Game of Thrones, I can't remember because it's right after Game of Thrones came out too, and that's when I started doing that. But yeah, that is because of this movie. So
you should really read a Redwall book.
I
really think you would like Redwall.
It's fair. I will highly, I'll just say this though, if you want a good, easy, fast, relatively healthy dinner
and satisfying,
the medieval feast dinner,
you really can't beat it.
Go to Walmart or wherever, get a rotisserie chicken, some cheese of whatever kind you like, some cherry tomatoes, some whatever other vegetables you like, and some bread, some crusty bread, and then your beverage of choice, and then just eat it all with your hands. And one, it's very delicious, and two, you will feel like a medieval king. So, or a hobbit, whatever.
Or a hobbit.
Yeah, whatever you want.
Something that kind of bummed me out. We talked about Ian McKellen being sad when he was filming this movie because he was like doing it all by himself on a green screen. Yes. And I felt like I could tell in that first scene, he looked sad and lost.
Yeah. And they actually did a good job compositing him because it was pretty hard to tell that he was not there. You could, but it was pretty well done. But you could also tell on the plus side that in the later scenes, he was very much in, like some of the other scenes, he was very much there with the people and he seemed more energized. It was mainly the Hobbit, the bag end scenes because they had to composite him in with all the dwarves and the hobbits and they couldn't. Yeah. So, I agree. You could tell. I mentioned it earlier, but yeah, Ori is the character who's the scribe who writes the book Gandalf reads in the Mines of Moria, the drums in the deep part, and Balin, who's the guy who's like Thorin's like best friend or whatever in this one, his mentor is the tomb in that one. So,
I really want you to start referring to me as the chiefest and greatest calamity of our age. That would make me very happy.
Okay. I'll keep that in mind. I'll remember that. Chapter 3 in this book is titled A Short Rest, and that's when they get to Rivendell. And I was wondering if that's where the D&D term originates. Like a short rest and a long rest.
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
So in D&D, I think specifically D&D, you can have... and I've never played, or not really, but I'm aware of there are these things called short and long rests in D&D. That allow you to like regenerate certain things. So like if you have a long rest, I think like all of your like spells and stuff regenerate or whatever, and like your health comes back. And a short rest gives you some benefits, but not all of the benefits. And so it, like, basically you can take like certain instances within D&D, like after a battle, you might be able to, like, depending on where you're at, you might be able to take a short rest, which allows you to regenerate some abilities or whatever. Or if you get to a very safe place like a Rivendell, you could take a long rest, which allows you to regenerate like all your stuff. And I was just wondering if the specific term, because that is like what it is called in D&D, is a short rest or a long rest. And I was wondering if that came from this title of the book. I don't know. I did some Googling.
I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised though, because we know that obviously
a lot of D&D was inspired by
Middle Earth and Lord of the Rings. Yeah.
I did some Googling. I couldn't find anything that explicitly stated that, but it seems likely to me.
I'm gonna have more kind of thoughts on what we're about to discuss here. We both do in the final verdict. But something I found so exhausting was how deadly seriously this movie takes itself.
At times.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was my big thing, is it's a mess tonally.
Yes.
And part of that goes back, some of that again does go back to the dwarf designs, where they couldn't decide between whimsical cartoon, that feel from the book, or the more grounded kind of gritty world that the Lord of the Rings movies established.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the biggest flaw with the connection to the Lord of the Rings movies is tonally.
Yes.
And like art direction and style and stuff, not so much like weaving them together like in terms of like the narrative, but in terms of like, are we doing Lord of the Rings or are we doing cartoon? Like, what are we doing? And that's where I think the biggest issue came, because we kind of get stuck in the middle and the movie teeter-totters back and forth between what it is,
and it very often does not work.
Yes. And I think that's where my big issue with it came.
Fun fact about me, I don't know if you know this.
I don't think I did.
No,
I did.
Did you know this?
I did, yeah.
I don't know if the good people know this.
No, I don't think so.
In college, I had 2 goldfish. Not for a super long time, because they're goldfish from the pet store, and I didn't really know how to take care of them.
Yeah.
But I did for a while in college have 2 goldfish named Orcrist the Goblin Cleaver and Glamdring the Foe Hammer.
Very good. Very good. I didn't remember that they gave Figwit a role in this movie.
Yeah.
Figwit shows up when they get to Rivendell. He like greets all the dwarves. And if you don't know, Figwit is an elf from Return of the King, Two Towers.
That's Return of the King, is it not?
I think it's Return of the King. Yeah. I couldn't remember. Yeah, when they're leaving, and they're going on their journey or whatever, he's part of the elf escort that goes with them all, with Arwen and stuff. When Arwen decides not to leave, like he's the elf that he's like, "Where are you going?" or whatever. And he's called Figwit because that's like a fan applied name that stands for Frodo is great. Who is that? Or right?
Yeah, Frodo is great. Who is that?
Yeah, who is that? Because he's this hot
handsome.
Handsome elf. Played by Brett McKenzie, who is half of Flight of the Conchords, the other half of which is Jermaine Clement, who you may know as the writer producer on like What We Do in the Shadows and all that kind of. He's worked on tons of stuff, but from New Zealand, which is why Brett McKenzie makes an appearance in this, because they filmed in New Zealand. They were actors in New Zealand at the time. But he got cast in this one again. But according to Brett McKenzie himself, he says that the character's name in this one, they say Linder or something like that. And he says it's not the same character as the elf in. But why in the world would it not be?
Wouldn't it be?
It's an elf from Rivendell hangs out with Elrond. Like, of course it's the same.
And they never say his name in the original trilogy.
No, he doesn't have a name.
So there's no reason it can't be the same character. I think it's a little weird that they'd specify that it isn't.
And again, that's just what I saw on it was like on the wiki article for this character.
Yeah.
He says Brett McKenzie, the actor, says it's not the same character, but he's a comedian too. He may have just been fucking with people. Like, I think it's the same character. It's got to be the same character. There's no reason it's not the same character. It's the same guy playing an elf that hangs out at Rivendell. It's got to be the same character. Why would it not be? I thought, and I mentioned earlier, but Hugo Weaving as Elrond is so good.
Hugo Weaving is really good.
He's great in everything, but man, I think he just is perfect as Elrond. He has such a great gravity, like gravitas, that is just works so well for that character.
Am I remembering correctly, that the marketing for this movie like played up the scene between Galadriel and Gandalf like they were going to be like a thing, and then people were mad about it? Or am I making that up?
So I will say this: I have quote Gandalf himself. I have no memory of this place, so I do not remember that at all.
It is very possible, because this was 2012 and this was like the prime time of my life when I was on Tumblr.
Yeah.
So it's very possible that this is something that I remember from Tumblr exclusively. So if you also were on Tumblr at this time and you remember this, please let me know so that I don't feel crazy. My like big Tolkien lore question from watching this movie is whether all elf blades glow blue when orcs are nearby, or if it's just Sting.
So I believe in the books it is all elf blades, or at the very least some specific. It's not just Sting, because it is very specifically mentioned that in the lore that Orcrist and Glamdring are supposed to glow. They don't apparently so Glamdring is in the Lord of the Rings series. That's the sword, because Gandalf has it the whole time, and that's the sword he has in that. And people have speculated. I don't know if maybe he says it in an interview or in special features or something. But I was reading something on Reddit or something about people saying that like probably he didn't have like Glamdring and other elf swords glow in the original or in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, because he didn't want people to be like confused about like why are these swords like if all the swords are glowing, they would look too much like lightsabers, and like he just thought it. And plus on top of that, having Sting be like the only one that glows in that series is a nice way to make Sting feel kind of special and cool or whatever.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know, but yes, as far as I know, either all elf blades glow or like lots of the very specific. Maybe they don't do it for all of them, but like they're like finest crafted swords or whatever.
Right, because I would
use some sort of
I was going to say I would imagine that would be a magic thing.
Yeah, so maybe they don't do it for every single sword they make, but like very specific, nice
the
ones,
important ones,
something. I don't know.
Only the best swords.
Point being, it's not just Sting that does it. It is because Sting's literally just like a dagger. It's not like some special. It becomes a special sword eventually, but this is some dagger that they find.
A moment at the end of the last fight scene at the end of this movie that was cracking me up was when they're all out on the tree and the movie cuts back and forth like 5 times between Azog and Thorin,
just staring,
just like back and forth
in slow-mo.
Yes. And I was like, oh, this is a lot. There's a lot of intense gazing between these two mortal enemies. And I think we all know what that means.
I'm sure that slash fic exists. I guarantee
I
it.
absolutely guarantee you that much slash fic of that exists.
Guarantee it. All right before we get to the final verdict, we want to remind you can do us a giant favor by heading over to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads, or Threads, any of the social media platforms where you can find us. Interact. We'd love to hear what you thought about The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey. How does it compare to the book? Which side do you land on in terms of, do you like that it's more like Lord of the Rings? Do you wish it was more of its own thing? What are your thoughts? We would love to hear it. We'll talk about that on the next prequel episode, so get those comments in ASAP. You can also help us out by heading over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you're listening to our show. Drop us a 5-star rating, write us a nice little review. That helps us get us out to more people. That's all great. And if you really want to help us, head over to patreon.com/thisfilmislit. Support us there. Different levels, but at the $5 and up level, you get access to bonus content. If you want to, every month we put out a bonus episode about whatever we want. Recently, we've talked about The Rocketeer. We're going to talk about 10 Things I Hate About You this month. We'll be doing something related to The Hobbit next month. So keep all that in mind if you want to get that bonus content, $5 and up. And if you support us for $15 a month or more, you get access to priority recommendations, where if there's something you would really like for us to talk about on a main episode of the show, support us for $15 a month, request it, and we will add it to our queue as soon as we possibly can. Katie, it's time for the final verdict.
Sentence fast, verdict after. That's stupid.
Since their release, the Hobbit movies have been something of a running joke. Turning one 300-ish page book into 3 3-hour movies was a choice, and it's resulted in quite a bit of mockery over the years. However, This first installment, at least, isn't as bad as their overall legacy might lead you to think. The movie is largely faithful to the book's major plot points, and it draws its biggest expansions from elements that are at least mentioned in the book. The necromancer, Thorin's backstory, and the question of where Gandalf goes and what he's doing when he disappears from the main storyline. But although the ideas are there on paper, in execution, the film stumbles. A big part of the problem for me is that the film is stuck in a weird middle ground between the book, a childlike, whimsical fairy story, and Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, high fantasy grounded in gritty realism and heavy themes. The film's uncertainty in its own tone results in an uneven world-building experience, perhaps best exemplified by the character design of the dwarves, and a loss of some of the more charming elements from the book. The orcs have to be horrible and scary and can, under no circumstances, sing a little song. Add to that too a bloated runtime, an over-reliance on too slick CGI animation, and references to Lord of the Rings that range from totally fine to kinda cringy fan service, and you've got a bit of a recipe for a disaster. We're one movie into the Hobbit trilogy, and I already find myself understanding that for me, part of this summer series will be mourning what we could have had with Guillermo del Toro at the helm. And as for what we ended up with, well, I'm giving this one to the book. But unlike Bilbo, I'm under no impression that the worst is behind us.
Before I read my final verdict here, I did want to mention that we write these separately for the summer series. Like, we each write them independently and then copy paste them into the document so that, like, one of us isn't, like, reading the other person's while we're writing it. Just, there's going to be some similarities here, but these were written separately on their own. So I actually really enjoyed this movie this time around. I thought it made a lot of really smart decisions with the script, fleshing out some of the stuff that's hinted at in the book and adding some character arcs and motivations that result in a film that stands firmly on its own by giving us a satisfying conclusion despite only being a third of the way through the book. I actually really loved the stuff from Gandalf and Galadriel and Elrond and Saruman, and I really liked the slight tweaks that they made to both Bilbo and Thorin's characters. But the movie is still a bit of a mess. You can absolutely tell that it did not get the painstaking attention to detail in the pre-production phase that the Lord of the Rings trilogy did. Some of the characters and moments feel like they belong in the comparably grittier Lord of the Rings trilogy, while others feel like they belong in a Saturday morning cartoon. And unfortunately, this dissonance results in an uneven viewing experience that just doesn't completely work. Slap on the fact that much of the movie has an overly polished CGI sheen that reminds me of some of the lesser fantasy properties out there, and the result is a movie that, while fun, simply doesn't hold up to the book. So while I have a feeling that this is the closest the competition will get this summer, I'm still giving this one to the book. So we agreed on our final verdict this time, and yeah, we shall see how we get going forward. But Katie, I mean, I think people know, but what's next?
Well, I mean, we're doing things a little differently this summer because often we're covering a bunch of separate books.
Yes, so we do.
So we have buffer episodes in between.
Yeah.
But this time we're slamming straight through, and we are going right on ahead to The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug.
There you go. So we will be talking about The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug in 2 weeks' time. But in 1 week's time, we'll be back for the prequel episode for that, where we will preview The Desolation of Smaug, as well as get all of your feedback, everything you had to say, all your arguments, all your disagreements about The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey. So let us know. Get those comments in, like I said, on all the social media. And we'll see you back in 1 week's time for that preview. Until that time, guys, gals, non-binary pals, and everybody else,
keep reading books,
keep watching movies,
and keep being awesome.